Chapter 1, A Merry Hollow Morning. The melodious chime of magical Christmas bells filled the air, their enchanted tones gently rousing Holly Evergreen from her slumber. She stirred beneath her peppermint-striped comforter, her curly red hair a tangled mess against the pillow. As consciousness slowly returned, a smile spread across her freckled face. Another day in Merry Hollow had begun. Holly stretched, her green eyes twinkling with the ever-present spark of Christmas magic that resided in every inhabitant of this extraordinary town. She swung her feet out of bed, toes curling against the warm, gingerbread-scented rug. With a flick of her wrist, she summoned her wand from the nightstand, a slender rod of holly wood, naturally, and gave it a merry little twirl. "Decorous Festivus," she murmured, and instantly, her wild bedhead transformed into a neat, festive updo, complete with sprigs of holly woven throughout. Another wave, and her flannel pajamas shimmered, becoming a cozy sweater adorned with prancing reindeer and a pair of leggings that looked like candy canes. Holly padded to her bathroom, where her enchanted toothbrush was already loaded with toothpaste that tasted like candy canes. As she brushed, she hummed at jingle bells, and the mirror fogged up with tiny snowflakes instead of steam. A quick rinse with mouthwash that left her breath smelling like fresh pine, and she was ready to face the day. Descending the stairs of her quaint cottage, Holly paused to admire the ever-present Christmas decorations. Garlands of evergreen draped every surface, twinkling with fairy lights that never needed changing. Her Christmas tree, a permanent fixture in the corner of her living room, gave a little wiggle of its branches in greeting, ornaments tinkling merrily. "Good morning to you too," Holly chuckled, giving the tree an affectionate pat as she passed. In the kitchen, she waved her wand at the coffee maker, which began to gurgle happily, filling the air with the rich aroma of peppermint mocha. A plate of gingerbread cookies, left over from last night's baking, shuffled across the counter on tiny icing feet, presenting itself to Holly for breakfast. She took a bite, savoring the perfect blend of spices and the tiny burst of Christmas cheer that every bite of her baking contained. As she sipped her coffee, Holly gazed out the window at the perpetually snow-covered landscape of Merry Hollow. The town was already bustling with activity, smoke curling from chimneys in spirals of red and green, while elves and humans alike bustled about their morning routines in a flurry of festive colors. With a contented sigh, Holly finished her breakfast and donned her favorite pointed witch's hat, its brim adorned with a wreath of miniature ornaments. She grabbed her wand and headed out the door, ready to open up the gingerbread cottage bakery for another day of magical baking. The bakery sat in the heart of Merry Hollow, its facade a perfect replica of a life-sized gingerbread house. Frosting icicles hung from the eaves, never melting, while gumdrop buttons lined the path to the front door. As Holly approached, the scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and sugar wafted through the air, drawing in early morning customers like enchanted sleigh bells. "Morning, Miss Holly," called out Jingle McBells, the town's resident elf mailman, his pointy ears quivering with excitement. "Got any of those magic mail-delivering cookies today? I've got a big route ahead of me." Holly laughed, unlocking the bakery door with a tap of her wand. "Fresh out of the oven in 10 minutes, Gingle. Come on in and warm up while you wait." The interior of the gingerbread cottage bakery was a wonder to behold. Display cases lined the walls, filled with an assortment of treats that could only exist in a place like Merry Hollow. There were gingerbread men that danced and sang carols when you bit into them, candy canes that could instantly cure any winter cold, and fruitcakes that actually tasted good, a true Christmas miracle. Holly bustled behind the counter, her wand weaving intricate patterns as she brought the bakery to life. Mixing bowls began to stir themselves, while the ovens preheated with little puffs of colored smoke. She checked on a batch of her famous mail-delivering cookies, sugar cookies infused with a spell that would allow Jingle to toss them to recipients' doorsteps, where they would transform into perfectly delivered letters. As the first customers began to trickle in, Holly greeted each with a warm smile and a personalized treat. There was Mrs. Claus, no relation to the North Pole Clauses, who came in for her daily eggnog latte and a slice of Silent Night cake, guaranteed to give the eater a perfect night's sleep. Then Frosty Snowman waddled in, looking for his usual order of never-melt ice cream sandwiches. "How's the weather looking today, Frost?" Holly asked as she handed over the frosty treats. Frost's coal eyes twinkled. "A perfect 32 degrees Fahrenheit, Miss Holly. Couldn't ask for better snowman weather." As the morning rush continued, Holly found herself in her element, her holiday-themed magic working overtime to keep up with demands. She piped intricate designs onto cookies with nothing but a thought, while her enchanted rolling pin flattened dough into perfect circles behind her. It was during a brief lull that Noelle Mistletoe, Holly's best friend and owner of the local toy shop, burst through the door in a flurry of tinsel and excitement. "Holly, have you heard the news?" Noelle exclaimed, her pointed ears quivering with excitement. "Mayor Kringle just announced the theme for this year's Candy Cane Festival." Holly's eyes widened with interest. The annual Candy Cane Festival was the highlight of Mary Hollow's social calendar, which was saying something in a town that celebrated Christmas every day. "Don't keep me in suspense, Noelle. What's the theme?" "A Dickens of a Christmas," Noelle squealed. "We're all supposed to decorate our shops and dress up like we're in a Charles Dickens novel. Isn't it exciting?" Holly's mind immediately began to race with ideas. "Oh, that's wonderful. I can make figgy puddings that actually grant wishes, and maybe some Oliver Twist gruel that tastes like a 5-course feast." As Noelle chattered on about her plans for Victorian-era toys, Holly's wand began to move of its own accord, jotting down ideas for festival treats on a floating notepad. Sugar plums that danced not just in your head but on the plate, mince pies with filling that told your fortune, and perhaps a Christmas Carol karaoke cake that would have even Ebenezer Scrooge singing along. With a wave of her wand, Holly summoned her recipe books from the back room. They floated around her, pages flipping rapidly as she searched for inspiration. "I'll need to start preparing right away," she mused, more to herself than to Noelle. The festival's only a week away. As excitement for the upcoming festival bubbled within her, Holly felt a familiar pang in her heart. It was in that moment, surrounded by the joy and magic of Mary Hollow, that she was reminded of those who were no longer there to share it with her. The memory came unbidden, as clear as if it had happened yesterday instead of 5 years ago. Her parents, Jonathan and Joy Evergreen, setting out for a midnight sleigh ride on Christmas Eve. The jingle of bells fading into the distance. The horrible wait as they failed to return. The search parties finding the remains of the sleigh at the bottom of Mistletoe Gulch, no sign of her parents. Holly's wand faltered, a batch of cookies nearly burning before she caught herself and rescued them from the oven. She took a deep breath, centering herself as she'd learned to do in the years since the accident. "Holly?" Noelle's voice was soft, concern evident in her tone. "Are you okay?" Holly managed a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Noelle. Just got lost in thought for a moment there." Noelle, knowing her friend all too well, gave Holly's hand a gentle squeeze. "They would be so proud of you, you know. Your parents. The way you've kept the bakery going, how you're always there for everyone in town. They're still here, in every bit of magic you create." Blinking back tears, Holly nodded. "Thanks, Noelle. You're right, of course. And they would have loved this festival theme. Dad always did do a great impression of Mr. Fezziwig." The two friends shared a laugh, the melancholy moment passing like a brief shadow over the perpetually bright town. As Noelle left to start her own festival preparations, Holly turned back to her work with renewed determination. Yes, there was sadness in her heart, a place that would always miss her parents. But there was also joy in the magic she wielded, in the treats she created, and in the happiness she brought to every resident of Mary Hollow. As she began to mix the batter for a new batch of Dickensian delights, Holly felt the familiar tingle of Christmas magic in her fingertips. The Candy Cane Festival was coming, and Holly Evergreen was ready to make it the most magical one yet. With a smile on her face and a sprinkle of enchanted sugar, she set to work, the spirit of Mary Hollow, and the memory of her parents, fueling every spell she cast. Chapter 2, Frost on the Christmas Tree. The warm, spicy aroma of gingerbread filled the gingerbread cottage bakery as Holly Evergreen piped intricate frosting designs onto a batch of Dickensian-themed cookies. Her wand moved with practiced precision, creating miniature scenes from A Christmas Carol on each treat. She had just finished detailing Tiny Tim's crutch when a blood-curdling scream shattered the peaceful morning atmosphere. Holly's head snapped up, her wand faltering mid-spell. The scream had come from the direction of the town square, its tone filled with unmistakable terror. Without hesitation, she dropped her piping bag and dashed for the door, her pointed witch's hat nearly flying off in her haste. "I'll be right back," she called to her enchanted rolling pin, which was in the middle of flattening dough for Christmas pudding pies. The magical implement gave a worried wiggle but continued its task as Holly burst out onto Candy Cane Lane. The streets of Mary Hollow, usually filled with cheerful chatter and the tinkling of sleigh bells, had fallen eerily silent. Holly's boots crunched in the ever-present snow as she ran towards the town square, her breath coming out in frosty puffs. The perpetual winter wonderland that was Mary Hollow now seemed ominous, the twinkling lights on every building flickering uncertainly as if sensing the disturbance. As she rounded the corner, the grand Christmas tree that stood at the heart of Mary Hollow came into view, and Holly skidded to a halt, her green eyes widening in shock. The massive evergreen, which had stood proud and luminous for as long as anyone could remember, seemed to shudder in the windless air, its ornaments tinkling discordantly. A crowd had already begun to gather, their faces pale with horror as they stared at the base of the magnificent tree. There, sprawled in the snow like a broken toy, lay the frozen body of Mayor Kris Kringle. The jolly old elf's usually rosy cheeks were blue, his white beard crusted with ice crystals. His eyes, always twinkling with mirth, were wide open in an expression of terror. "Oh, holy night," Holly whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. She pushed through the growing throng, her status as one of the town's most powerful witches earning her a path to the front. As she approached the body, the great Christmas tree above them began to shudder more violently. Its branches trembled, ornaments tinkling ominously. Then, with a sound like 1,000 sighs, the magical lights that had burned continuously for as long as anyone could remember began to flicker and fade. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as darkness crept up the tree, extinguishing the cheerful glow bulb by bulb. Within moments, the once resplendent tree stood dark and foreboding against the gray winter sky, a silent sentinel to the tragedy at its roots. Panic rippled through the gathered townsfolk. Voices rose in a cacophony of fear and confusion. "The tree! The lights have gone out. But that's impossible. The magic has never failed before. Is it the end of Christmas? What happened to the mayor?" Holly forced herself to tune out the frightened chatter, focusing instead on the scene before her. With a deep breath, she drew her wand and began to examine the area around Mayor Kringle's body, murmuring detection spells under her breath. "Revelio Magici," she whispered, her wand tracing intricate patterns in the air. The tip of her wand glowed softly, casting a pale light over the snow-covered ground. Faint traces of magical residue shimmered in the air, visible only to her enchanted sight. It was unlike anything she'd ever encountered before, a swirling mix of deep purple and icy blue that seemed to recoil from her probing magic. Holly frowned, her mind racing. This was powerful magic, far beyond the cheerful holiday spells that usually permeated Mary Hollow. She knelt beside the mayor's body, careful not to disturb any potential evidence. Up close, the damage was even more apparent. Mayor Kringle's skin had an unnatural blue tinge, and frost patterns swirled across his cheeks and forehead. His eyes, usually twinkling with joy and mischief, were glassy and filled with fear. Holly's heart ached at the sight. Mayor Kringle had been a fixture in Mary Hollow for as long as she could remember, his jolly laugh and twinkling eyes a constant source of cheer. He had been there to cut the ribbon when she first opened the gingerbread cottage bakery, and had never missed a chance to stop by for her famous sugar plum scones. As she continued her examination, the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Holly glanced up to see Peppermint Sticks, the head of Mary Hollow's candy cane security force, pushing his way through the throng. The elf's usually immaculate uniform was hastily donned, his hat askew on his head. "Make way! Official business!" Pepper shouted, his voice cracking slightly as he took in the scene. Behind him trailed several other members of the security force, their faces a mix of shock and bewilderment. Holly straightened up as Pepper approached, his eyes darting nervously between her, the mayor's body, and the darkened tree. "Miss Evergreen," he said, attempting to sound authoritative despite his obvious distress. What happened here?" Holly shook her head, her brow furrowed with concern. "I'm not sure, Chief Mintsticks. I heard the scream and came running, just like everyone else. But this..." She gestured to the magical residue only she could see. "This is like no magic I've ever encountered in Mary Hollow." Pepper's pointed ears drooped slightly. "Magic? You mean this wasn't an accident? Not just a case of extreme frostbite or a cocoa overdose?" "I'm afraid not," Holly replied softly. "There are traces of powerful, foreign magic all around the body. And it's connected to the tree losing its light. This was no accident, Chief Mintsticks. This was murder." The word seemed to hang in the air, as heavy and cold as the snow that perpetually blanketed their town. Pepper swallowed hard, looking overwhelmed. "Murder? But we haven't had a murder in Mary Hollow since, well, ever. What do we do?" Holly looked around at the frightened faces of her fellow townsfolk, at the darkened tree that had always been a beacon of hope and joy, and at the frozen body of Mayor Kringle, who had led their town with jolly wisdom for as long as she could remember. In that moment, she knew what she had to do. "We investigate," she said firmly, squaring her shoulders. "This is more than just a crime, Chief Mintsticks. Whoever did this has struck at the very heart of Mary Hollow's magic. If we don't solve this quickly, I fear the consequences could be dire for all of us." Pepper nodded, seeming relieved to have someone take charge. "Of course, Miss Evergreen. The candy cane security force is at your disposal. Where do we start?" Holly's mind was already racing, formulating a plan. "First, we need to secure the area. No one touches anything until we've had a chance to thoroughly examine every magical trace. Then, we'll need to question everyone who was in the square this morning. Someone must have seen something." As Pepper began barking orders to his team, Holly cast one more glance at the darkened tree. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the perpetual winter weather. Something wicked had come to Mary Hollow, threatening not just their way of life, but the very magic that sustained their eternal Christmas. And Holly Evergreen, witch and baker extraordinaire, was determined to stop it. With a flick of her wand, she conjured a magical barrier around the crime scene, its shimmering surface decorated with gently falling snowflakes to maintain the festive atmosphere despite the grim circumstances. As curious onlookers pressed against the barrier, Holly knelt once more beside Mayor Kringle's body, her keen eyes searching for any clue that might shed light on this dark mystery. "Pepper," Holly called, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart, "we need to preserve the mayor's body. Do we have a preservation spell strong enough to counteract whatever magic did this?" The security chief looked uncertain. "Our standard preservation charms are meant for keeping gingerbread houses intact during blizzards, not this." He gestured helplessly at the mayor's frozen form. Holly nodded, having expected as much. "All right, then we'll need to improvise." She raised her wand, taking a deep breath to center herself. This would require a complex bit of spellwork, combining preservation magic with a containment charm to prevent any further magical contamination. "Conservo corpus, contineo magici," Holly intoned, her wand weaving intricate patterns in the air. A soft, golden light emerged from the tip, enveloping Mayor Kringle's body in a protective cocoon. The ice crystals on his skin seemed to retreat slightly, and the unsettling magical residue Holly had detected earlier was contained within the spell's bound. A murmur ran through the crowd at Frost's words. Holly felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Could these old legends hold the key to solving the mystery? "Mr. Snowman," she said, "I think we're going to need access to those historical records. There might be clues in the town's past that could help us understand what's happening now." Frost nodded solemnly. "Of course, Miss Evergreen. I'll open the archives to you. But be warned, some of what you find may challenge everything you thought you knew about Mary Hollow." As Holly absorbed this ominous statement, a commotion at the edge of the crowd caught her attention. Noelle Mistletoe had arrived, her usually cheerful face streaked with tears. "Holly!" Noelle cried, rushing forward. "Is it true? Is the mayor really?" Her voice trailed off as she caught sight of the body, and a fresh wave of tears spilled down her cheeks. Holly put a comforting arm around her friend's shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Noelle. I know you and the mayor were close." Noelle had often spoken of how Mayor Kringle had mentored her when she first opened her toy shop. "But I need to ask you, did you see anything unusual this morning? Anything at all that might help us figure out what happened?" Noelle wiped her eyes, visibly trying to pull herself together. I'm not sure. I was in the back of the shop, taking inventory. But now that you mention it, I did hear something strange. A sort of crackling sound, like ice forming very quickly. I thought it was just the wind at first, but..." Holly's eyes widened. This could be their first real lead. "Thank you, Noelle. That's very helpful. Can you show me exactly where you were when you heard this?" As Holly prepared to follow Noelle to her shop, she caught sight of something that made her pause. At the edge of the crowd, partially hidden behind a lamppost, stood a figure she didn't recognize. A tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. For a moment, their eyes met, and Holly felt a strange chill that had nothing to do with the perpetual winter weather. Then someone moved in front of her, blocking her view, and when she looked again, the mysterious stranger was gone. Shaking off the odd feeling, Holly turned her attention back to the task at hand. She had a mystery to solve, a killer to catch, and a town's magic to save. And she had a feeling that this was only the beginning of a very long and dangerous journey. As she followed Noelle towards the toy shop, Holly couldn't help but cast one last glance at the darkened Christmas tree. Its unlit branches seemed to reach out like grasping fingers against the gray sky, a silent reminder of the threat looming over Mary Hollow. Whatever dark force had invaded their town, Holly was determined to face it head-on. For the sake of Mayor Kringle, for the magic of Mary Hollow, and for the spirit of Christmas itself, she would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. With a flick of her wand, she conjured a magical barrier around the crime scene, its shimmering surface decorated with gently falling snowflakes to maintain the festive atmosphere despite the grim circumstances. As curious onlookers pressed against the barrier, Holly knelt once more beside Mayor Kringle's body, her keen eyes searching for any clue that might shed light on this dark mystery. Chapter 3: A Chilling New Acquaintance. The next morning dawned gray and somber over Mary Hollow, the usual twinkling lights and cheerful decorations seeming muted in the wake of yesterday's tragedy. Holly Evergreen stood at the window of her cottage, sipping a mug of peppermint hot chocolate as she steeled herself for the day ahead. The events of the previous day weighed heavily on her mind, Mayor Kringle's frozen body, the darkened Christmas tree, and the palpable fear that had settled over the town like a thick blanket of snow. With a determined sigh, Holly donned her witch's hat and grabbed her enchanted notebook. She had spent most of the night poring over old spell books and town records, searching for any clues that might shed light on the mysterious magic that had killed the mayor. Her notebook was now filled with hastily scribbled theories and questions, each page sprinkled with a dash of magical ink that caused the words to shimmer and reorganize themselves as new connections formed. As Holly made her way through the quiet streets towards the town square, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The usual warmth and coziness of Merry Hollow seemed to have vanished overnight, replaced by an atmosphere of suspicion and unease. Even the gingerbread men in the shop windows appeared to eye her warily as she passed. Rounding the corner into the town square, Holly's breath caught in her throat. The great Christmas tree, once a beacon of light and joy, now stood dark and foreboding against the gray sky. The magical barrier she had erected around the crime scene still shimmered faintly, its snowflake decorations falling endlessly in a silent cascade. As she approached the barrier, fishing in her pocket for her wand to lower the spell, a gust of icy wind suddenly whipped past her. Holly gasped, stumbling slightly, and her notebook slipped from her grasp. Pages fluttered in the wind as it fell, scattering her precious notes across the snow-covered ground. "Oh, sugar plums," Holly muttered, dropping to her knees to gather the wayward pages. As she reached for a particularly evasive sheet, a pale hand with long, elegant fingers beat her to it. "I believe this belongs to you," said a voice as smooth and cool as fresh fallen snow. Holly looked up, her green eyes meeting a pair of startlingly blue ones. The man standing before her was tall and lean, with silvery hair that seemed to shimmer with frost. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and he was dressed in a suit that appeared to be made of the finest ice crystals, shifting and glinting in the weak morning light. "Thank you," Holly said, accepting the page from him. As their fingers brushed, she felt a jolt of cold energy that made her shiver. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Holly Evergreen." The man's lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach his icy eyes. "Jack Frost," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "I'm new in town. Arrived just yesterday, as a matter of fact." Holly's witch's intuition prickled. A newcomer arriving on the very day of Mayor Kringle's murder? That was certainly suspicious. But there was something about Jack Frost that intrigued her, a sense of ancient power that both thrilled and unnerved her. "Welcome to Merry Hollow, Mr. Frost," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Though I'm afraid you've arrived at a rather unfortunate time." Jack's expression turned somber. "Yes, I heard about the tragic events of yesterday. The whole town is buzzing with the news. A frozen mayor and a darkened Christmas tree, it's all quite distressing." Holly narrowed her eyes slightly. For someone who had just arrived in town, Jack seemed remarkably well informed about the details of the crime. "Indeed it is," she agreed cautiously. "In fact, I was just returning to the scene to continue my investigation." "Ah, so you're in charge of solving this mystery?" Jack asked, his tone light but his gaze intensely focused on Holly. "How fascinating. I don't suppose you'd mind if I tagged along? I have some experience with magical investigations, and I'd be more than happy to offer my assistance." Holly hesitated. On one hand, she could certainly use all the help she could get with this baffling case. On the other, she knew nothing about this Jack Frost or his motives for wanting to get involved. But her curiosity won out over her caution. "I suppose that would be all right," she said slowly. "But I'll need to know more about your background and this experience you mentioned." Jack's smile widened, revealing teeth as white as fresh snow. "Of course, I'd be happy to elaborate. Shall we?" He gestured towards the magical barrier. As they approached the crime scene, Holly surreptitiously observed her new acquaintance. There was a fluid grace to his movements, as if he was gliding rather than walking. The air around him seemed cooler, and she noticed that his breath didn't create puffs of steam in the cold air like hers did. "So, Mr. Frost," Holly began as she lowered the magical barrier with a wave of her wand, "you mentioned having experience with magical investigations. Care to elaborate?" Jack stepped through the shimmering curtain of magic, his eyes scanning the area with keen interest. "I've traveled extensively," he said, his voice distant as if lost in memory. "In my journeys, I've encountered many magical phenomena and helped solve a fair few mysteries. I have a particular affinity for winter magic, as you might have guessed." As if to demonstrate, Jack raised a hand, palm up. A swirl of icy particles coalesced above his palm, forming a perfect, miniature replica of the merry hollow Christmas tree, complete with tiny, twinkling lights. Holly couldn't help but gasp in admiration. The level of detail and control in Jack's magic was impressive. "That's remarkable," she said, leaning in for a closer look. "I've never seen ice magic so finely tuned." Jack closed his hand, and the ice sculpture dissolved into a flurry of snowflakes that danced away on the breeze. "Thank you," he said, a hint of genuine warmth creeping into his voice. "I've had a long time to practice." Turning her attention back to the crime scene, Holly began to explain her findings from the previous day. "The magical residue I detected was unlike anything I've ever seen in Merry Hollow," she said, pointing to areas that still shimmered faintly with the foreign magic. "It's a mix of deep purple and icy blue, and it seemed to recoil from my detection spells." Jack nodded thoughtfully, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Interesting. The blue could indicate some form of ice magic, but the purple, that suggests something darker. Perhaps a corruption of traditional winter magic." Holly felt a chill run down her spine at Jack's words. "Corruption? You mean someone could be purposely twisting Christmas magic for evil purposes?" "It's a possibility we can't ignore," Jack said gravely. "In my experience, there are always those who seek to pervert pure magic for their own gain." As they continued to examine the scene, Holly found herself both impressed by Jack's insights and increasingly curious about his background. He spoke with the authority of someone who had seen far more of the magical world than the average Merry Hollow resident, and his command of ice magic was truly extraordinary. But there was also something guarded about him, a coolness that went beyond his icy powers. Every time Holly asked a personal question, Jack would deftly deflect, turning the conversation back to the case at hand. After about an hour of investigation, Holly decided it was time to establish some ground rules. "Mr. Frost," she began, turning to face him directly, "I appreciate your help and insights. I think we could work well together on this case. But I need to be clear, I'm the lead investigator here. Any decisions about the direction of the investigation or sharing of information with the town authorities will go through me. Are we clear?" Jack met her gaze steadily, a flicker of something, respect, perhaps, passing through his icy eyes. "Crystal clear, Miss Evergreen. I'm here to assist, not to take over. You'll find me a valuable ally, I assure you." Holly nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and unease about their new partnership. Jack Frost was undeniably brilliant and his magic could be a tremendous asset in solving the case. But there was still so much she didn't know about him, so many questions left unanswered. As they prepared to leave the crime scene, replacing the magical barrier, Holly caught sight of peppermint sticks hurrying across the square towards them. The elf's face was pinched with worry, his pointed ears quivering with agitation. "Miss Evergreen," Pepper called out as he approached. "Thank goodness I've found you. There's been another incident." Holly's heart sank. "What kind of incident, Chief Minstix?" Pepper wrung his hands nervously. Chapter 4, Whispers in the Snow. The morning after the discovery of the frozen communication crystal dawned cold and gray over Merry Hollow. Holly Evergreen stood at the window of her gingerbread cottage, sipping a mug of hot cocoa laced with a dash of courage-boosting peppermint. Her green eyes scanned the quiet street, noting the distinct lack of the usual morning bustle. The town's perpetual Christmas cheer seemed to have dimmed overnight, replaced by a palpable sense of unease. A soft knock at her door broke Holly from her reverie. She opened it to find Jack Frost standing on her doorstep, looking as crisp and cool as ever in his crystalline suit. "Good morning, Miss Evergreen," Jack said, offering a small bow. "I thought we might continue our investigation today. Perhaps we could start by speaking with some of the townspeople?" Holly nodded, grabbing her witch's hat and wand. "I was thinking the same thing. We should start with Noel mistletoe. Her toy shop overlooks the town square, and she might have seen something the day of the murder. As they made their way through the snow-covered streets, Holly couldn't help but notice the way the other residents eyed Jack with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Whispers followed in their wake, and more than once she caught the words outsider and coincidence floating on the chilly breeze. Mistletoe's magical toys sat on the corner of Candy Cane Lane and Gingerbread Avenue, its windows usually a riot of color and movement. Today, however, the animated displays were still, the toys standing silent sentinel behind frosted glass. A closed sign hung on the door, but Holly could see a light on in the back of the shop. She rapped gently on the glass, calling out, "Noel? It's Holly. Are you there?" After a moment, they heard the sound of footsteps, and Noel appeared at the door. The usually cheerful elf looked drawn and tired, her pointy ears drooping slightly. "Holly," she said, managing a weak smile. Come in, come in." Her eyes flickered to Jack, a question in their depths. "This is Jack Frost," Holly explained as they stepped into the warmth of the shop. "He's helping with the investigation." Noel nodded, leading them to the back room where a half-finished rocking horse stood on a workbench, its paint only partially applied. "Can I get you some tea?" she asked, her hostess instincts kicking in despite her obvious distress. "No, thank you," Holly said gently. "Noel, we were hoping you might be able to help us. Did you notice anything unusual about Mayor Kringle in the days before the incident?" Noel sank into a chair, her small frame seeming to shrink even further. I'm not sure," she said hesitantly. "The mayor was always so jolly, you know? But now that you mention it, he did seem a bit distracted lately." "Distracted how?" Jack prompted, his icy blue eyes intent on Noel's face. "Well," Noel said, twisting her hands in her lap, "he would come into the shop, like he always did to check on the toy quotas for the North Pole. But sometimes he'd just stand there, staring out the window at the great Christmas tree. And once, I could have sworn I saw frost on his beard, not the usual snow, mind you, but actual ice crystals." Holly and Jack exchanged a significant look. "Did he say anything about these moments?" Holly asked. Noel shook her head. "No, he'd just snap out of it and be his usual jolly self." "But..." She hesitated, glancing between Holly and Jack. "But what?" Holly encouraged. "The last time I saw him, the day before it happened," Noel's voice quavered, "he said something strange. He said, 'Noel, my dear, remember that even in the darkest winter, Christmas magic burns bright.' I thought he was just being his usual festive self, but now I wonder if he knew something was coming." As they left Noel's shop, Holly's mind was whirling with this new information. She was so lost in thought that she almost walked right into Carol Snowbell, Mary Hollow's resident gossip. "Oh! Holly, dear!" Carol exclaimed, her voice as light and airy as the snowflakes that perpetually swirled around her. "I was just on my way to see you. You'll never guess what I've heard." Holly suppressed a sigh. Carol's news was often more fiction than fact, but sometimes there were grains of truth hidden in the flurry of her words. "What is it, Carol?" Carol's eyes sparkled with excitement, and she leaned in conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "Well, I heard from Tinsel, who heard from Jingle, who overheard Mary and Pippin talking about how they saw Mayor Kringle sneaking out late at night." "Sneaking out?" Jack repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Where to?" Carol turned her attention to Jack, giving him an appraising look. "Oh, hello there. You must be the newcomer everyone's talking about. Jack Frost, isn't it? How exciting to have a celebrity in our midst." "Carol," Holly said firmly, trying to steer the conversation back on track. "Where was the mayor supposedly going?" "Oh, yes," Carol said, refocusing. Well, according to what I heard, he was heading towards the Whispering Woods. You know, that spooky old forest on the outskirts of town? They say he'd go there late at night, all bundled up like he was trying not to be recognized. And get this, he wasn't alone. Holly felt a chill that had nothing to do with the perpetual winter weather. Not alone? Who was he meeting? Carol shrugged, snowflakes falling from her shoulders with the movement. No one knows for sure. But Tinsel swears she saw a tall figure in a dark cloak waiting for the mayor at the edge of the woods. Very mysterious, don't you think? As Carol fluttered off to spread her gossip to the next willing ear, Holly turned to Jack. What do you make of that? She asked, keeping her voice low. Jack's face was thoughtful, his icy eyes distant. It's certainly interesting. If true, it could explain the mayor's distracted behavior that Noelle mentioned. But Carol isn't exactly the most reliable source, Holly finished for him. Still, it might be worth checking out the Whispering Woods. Even if the meetings aren't real, there could be clues there. As they continued down the street, discussing the possibility of a forest expedition, Holly became aware of a change in the atmosphere. The few townspeople out and about were huddled in small groups, talking in hushed voices. As Holly and Jack passed, conversations would stop abruptly, only to resume in fervent whispers once they were out of earshot. They're scared, Jack observed quietly. And they don't know who to trust. Holly nodded, her heart heavy. Mary Hollow had always been a place of warmth and community, even in the depths of its eternal winter. To see her neighbors eyeing each other with suspicion was almost as painful as the loss of Mayor Kringle. Their path took them past Sugarplum Square, where a group of young elf children were huddled together, their usual place subdued. As Holly and Jack approached, they could hear sniffles and quiet sobs. What's wrong, little ones? Holly asked gently, kneeling down to their level. A small elf girl with bright red hair looked up at her with tear-filled eyes. Is Christmas going to die? She asked tremulously. The question hit Holly like a punch to the gut. She glanced at Jack, seeing her own concern mirrored in his icy eyes. Then, taking a deep breath, she smiled at the children. Of course not, she said with as much cheer as she could muster. Christmas magic is the strongest magic there is. It lives in each and every one of you. But the big tree is dark, a boy elf piped up. And Mayor Kringle is. The tree will shine again, Holly assured them. And Mayor Kringle would want us all to keep the Christmas spirit alive in our hearts. Can you do that for him? The children nodded solemnly, but still looked uncertain. Then, to Holly's surprise, Jack knelt down beside her. Would you like to see some magic? He asked, his voice gentler than Holly had ever heard it. The children nodded eagerly, their tears momentarily forgotten. Jack smiled, a real, warm smile that transformed his usually aloof features, and held out his hands. With a flourish, he created a small flurry of snowflakes, each one unique and twinkling with an inner light. You see, Jack said as the children gasped in wonder, Christmas magic is everywhere, in every snowflake and icicle. Chapter 5, Numbers Don't Lie. The morning after their venture into the Whispering Woods, Holly Evergreen and Jack Frost found themselves standing before a stern-looking building on Figgy Pudding Lane. Unlike the whimsical, gingerbread-style architecture that dominated most of Mary Hollow, this structure was all sharp angles and somber hues. A brass plaque beside the door read Ebenezer Scrooge III, Certified Public Accountant. Are you sure about this? Jack asked, his breath creating no vapor in the frigid air. From what you've told me, Scrooge isn't exactly the most cooperative resident of Mary Hollow. Holly nodded, adjusting her witch's hat. Ebenezer may be grumpy, but he's thorough. If there's anything odd in the town's finances, he'll know about it. She raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could make contact, the door swung open. Ebenezer Scrooge III stood before them, his thin face set in a permanent scowl beneath a green eyeshade. "Miss Evergreen," he said, his voice as dry as year-old fruit cake. "I wondered when you'd come sniffing around. And you've brought the newcomer, I see." His roomy eyes narrowed as they fell on Jack. "Good morning, Mr. Scrooge," Holly said brightly, undeterred by his frosty reception. "We were hoping we could ask you a few questions about the town's finances." Ebenezer's scowl deepened. "Finances are confidential, Miss Evergreen. You know that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." He began to close the door, but Jack's hand shot out, holding it open with surprising strength. "Mr. Scrooge," Jack said, his voice low and intense, "I understand your desire for privacy. But surely you realize that these are extraordinary circumstances. Mayor Kringle is dead, the great tree is dark, and Merry Hollow itself may be in danger. Surely that warrants bending the rules a little?" For a long moment, Ebenezer stared at Jack, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in a fierce frown. Then, with a heavy sigh, he stepped back. "Oh, very well. Come in, but touch nothing." The interior of Scrooge's office was as austere as its exterior. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, each labeled with meticulous precision. A massive ledger dominated the desk, its pages covered in neat columns of figures. "Now," Ebenezer said, settling into his chair with a creak, "what exactly is it you want to know?" Holly and Jack exchanged a glance before Holly spoke. "We're looking for anything unusual in the town's recent financial records. Any large expenditures, unexpected transfers, that sort of thing." Ebenezer's eyebrows rose slightly. "Unusual expenditures? In Merry Hollow?" "Miss Evergreen, our budget hasn't changed significantly in over a century. We're a town of eternal Christmas, remember? Our needs are constant." "Please, Mr. Scrooge," Holly pressed. "Just humor us. Check the records for the past few months. Anything out of the ordinary, no matter how small." With a huff of annoyance, Ebenezer pulled the massive ledger towards him and began to flip through its pages. As he scanned the columns of numbers, his frown gradually shifted from irritation to confusion. "Well, I'll be a sugarplum fairy," he muttered. "There is something odd here." Holly leaned forward eagerly. "What is it?" Ebenezer tapped a bony finger on a line of figures. "Here. And here. And here again. Small transfers, but to an account I don't recognize. All authorized by Mayor Kringle himself." Jack peered at the ledger. "Where was the money going?" "That's just it," Ebenezer said, sounding personally offended by the mystery. "The account number doesn't correspond to any known Merry Hollow business or resident. It's as if the mayor was funneling funds to nowhere." Holly felt a chill run down her spine. "How much money are we talking about, Mr. Scrooge?" Ebenezer's quill scratched across a piece of parchment as he tallied the figures. "Over the past 3 months, approximately 50,000 candy canes." Jack whistled softly. "That's a significant sum." "Indeed it is, young man," Ebenezer agreed. "Enough to buy every child in Merry Hollow a new toy sleigh, with plenty left over for hot cocoa." Holly's mind was racing. When was the last transfer made? Ebenezer consulted the ledger again. 2 days before the mayor's unfortunate demise. A heavy silence fell over the office as the implications of this discovery sank in. It was Jack who finally broke it. "Mr. Scrooge," he said carefully, "did you notice anything else unusual about the mayor's behavior recently? Any meetings or conversations that seemed out of the ordinary?" Ebenezer leaned back in his chair, his eyes growing distant. "Well, now that you mention it. I did see something strange about a week before the incident. I was working late, end of quarter, and I saw Mayor Kringle out in the square. He seemed to be arguing with someone. Holly leaned forward. Who? Ginger Snapdragon, Ebenezer said, his nose wrinkling slightly at the name. That hot-tempered dragon who runs the cocoa stand. They were having quite the heated discussion. I couldn't hear what was said, but the mayor looked worried. And Ginger, well, she was practically breathing fire. Holly and Jack exchanged a significant look. This was the second time Ginger Snapdragon's name had come up in connection with the mayor's unusual behavior. Mr. Scrooge, Holly said, would it be possible for us to get copies of these financial records? Ebenezer hesitated, his natural instinct for secrecy warring with the gravity of the situation. Finally, he nodded. I suppose, under the circumstances, it would be permissible. But I'll need to record exactly what I've given you, and you must promise to keep this information confidential. As Ebenezer busied himself with copying the relevant pages from his ledger, Holly and Jack moved to a corner of the office to confer in hushed tones. What do you think? Holly asked. Could these mysterious transfers be connected to the mayor's death? Jack's icy blue eyes were thoughtful. It's certainly suspicious. The timing, the secrecy, it all points to Mayor Kringle being involved in something he didn't want the rest of Mary Hollow to know about. But what? Holly mused. What could be so important that he'd risk embezzling town funds? And how does Ginger Snapdragon fit into all this? Jack shook his head. I don't know. But I think our next stop should be a visit to a certain hot cocoa stand. Maybe Ginger can shed some light on that argument Ebenezer witnessed. Their whispered conversation was interrupted by Ebenezer clearing his throat. He held out a stack of parchment, each sheet covered in neat columns of figures. Here, he said gruffly. Everything I could find related to those unusual transfers. I do hope this helps you get to the bottom of this unpleasantness. As Holly reached for the documents, Ebenezer's hand suddenly clasped her wrist. His rheumy eyes, usually so disinterested, were now sharp with concern. Be careful, Miss Evergreen, he said, his voice low and urgent. You're tugging at threads that some might prefer stay unraveled. Mary Hollow has its secrets, like any town. Some of them are best left buried in the snow, if you take my meaning. Holly felt a chill that had nothing to do with the perpetual winter outside. What do you mean, Mr. Scrooge? Do you know something about what's happening? Ebenezer released her wrist, his eyes darting nervously to the windows as if checking for eavesdroppers. I'm just an accountant, Miss Evergreen. I deal in numbers, not mysteries. But I've been in this town a long time, longer than most realize. And I've seen things, heard things. This business with the mayor, the tree, it's stirring up old magic. Dark magic. The kind that should have stayed forgotten. Jack stepped forward, his presence suddenly commanding. Mr. Scrooge, if you know something that could help us protect Mary Hollow, you need to tell us. For a moment, it seemed Ebenezer might say more. But then he shook his head, the movement causing his eyeshade to slip down over his eyes. When he pushed it back up, his face had resumed its usual dark expression. Chapter 6, Hot Cocoa and Cold Leads. The aroma of rich cocoa and spices grew stronger as Holly Evergreen and Jack Frost approached Ginger Snapdragon's hot cocoa stand. Located on the corner of Candy Cane Lane and Mistletoe Avenue, the stand was a Mary Hollow institution, famous for its dragonfire brewed beverages that could warm even the coldest of hearts. As they drew closer, Holly could see Ginger herself behind the counter, her scales gleaming a deep crimson in the weak winter sunlight. Steam curled from her nostrils as she breathed, adding to the perpetual cloud of vapor that surrounded her stand. The dragon's golden eyes narrowed as she spotted Holly and Jack approaching. Well, Ginger rumbled, her voice like gravel in a cement mixer. If it isn't Mary Hollow's newest dynamic duo. Come for a cup of cocoa, or are you here to accuse me of murder? Holly winced at the dragon's blunt words. We're not here to accuse anyone of anything, Ginger. We just want to ask you a few questions. Ginger snorted, a small jet of flame escaping her nostrils. Questions. Right. Because a dragon can't possibly be minding her own business without being involved in some nefarious plot. Jack stepped forward, his icy presence a stark contrast to the warmth emanating from Ginger's stand. Ms. Snapdragon, we understand your frustration. But surely you can see why we need to investigate every angle. Mayor Kringle's death has shaken the entire town. For a moment, it seemed Ginger might refuse to cooperate. But then her shoulders slumped slightly, and she let out a long sigh that smelled of cinnamon and smoke. Fine. Ask your questions. But make it quick. I've got cocoa to brew. Holly nodded gratefully. Thank you, Ginger. We've heard that you and Mayor Kringle had an argument shortly before his death. Can you tell us what that was about? Ginger's eyes flashed dangerously. Who told you that? Was it that nosy Ebenezer? I swear, that elf sees more than he lets on. It doesn't matter who told us, Jack interjected smoothly. What matters is what happened. Please, Ms. Snapdragon. Any information could be crucial. Ginger was quiet for a long moment, absently polishing a mug with a cloth held delicately in her clawed hands. When she spoke, her voice was uncharacteristically soft. It wasn't an argument, not really. It was a disagreement about tradition. Holly leaned in, intrigued. Tradition? What do you mean? Ginger set down the mug with a sharp click. Mayor Kringle came to me with a proposal. He wanted to modernize some of Mary Hollow's older practices. Specifically, he wanted to change the way we make our hot cocoa. Jack raised an eyebrow. Change the cocoa? How? He wanted to replace dragon fire with some newfangled magical heating system, Ginger growled, smoke curling from her nostrils. Said it would be more efficient and environmentally friendly. As if there's anything more natural than dragon fire. Holly frowned, puzzled. But why would the mayor want to change something so fundamental to Mary Hollow? The dragonfire cocoa is one of our most beloved traditions. Ginger shrugged her massive shoulders. He said times were changing. That we needed to adapt to survive. But if you ask me, he was scared. Scared? Jack prompted. Of what? Of the old ways, Ginger said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Of the deep magic that runs through Mary Hollow. He said we were sitting on a powder keg of ancient power, and that if we didn't start changing things, it might explode in our faces. Holly and Jack exchanged a significant look. This aligned with the warnings Ebenezer had given them about old magic stirring in the town. Ginger, Holly said carefully, can you tell us more about this deep magic the mayor mentioned? What did he mean by that? The dragon shifted uncomfortably, her scales rustling. Look, I'm just a simple cocoa brewer. I don't know much about the really old stuff. But I do know that Mary Hollow's magic goes deeper than most folks realize. The eternal Christmas, the way we can bend reality to make toys and treats, it all comes from somewhere, doesn't it? Jack nodded thoughtfully. And the dragon fire? How does that fit into all this? Ginger's eyes gleamed with pride. Dragon fire is one of the oldest magics there is. It's not just heat, it's life, it's transformation. When I brew cocoa with my fire, I'm not just warming it up. I'm infusing it with a little bit of that ancient power. It's why our cocoa can warm you right down to your soul. As Ginger spoke, Holly found herself reevaluating everything she thought she knew about Mary Hollow. She had always taken the town's magic for granted, never questioning where it came from or how deep it went. Now, she was beginning to realize that there were layers upon layers of enchantment woven into the very fabric of their home. "Can you tell us more about how dragon fire interacts with the cocoa?" Holly asked, her curiosity piqued. "Is it different from regular fire?" Ginger puffed up her chest, clearly pleased to be asked about her expertise. "Oh, it's worlds different. Regular fire just heats things up. Dragon fire, well, it's got a mind of its own. It seeks out the essence of what it's heating, brings out the best in it. When I breathe on the cocoa beans, I'm not just roasting them. I'm coaxing out their deepest flavors, their hidden magic." Jack seemed particularly fascinated by this discussion of traditional magic. His icy blue eyes were alight with interest, and he peppered Ginger with questions about the specifics of her fire brewing technique. "So, the dragon fire acts as a conduit for the older magics?" he asked, leaning forward intently. "And this process has remained unchanged for, how long exactly?" Ginger puffed up her chest even more. "My family has been brewing cocoa in Mary Hollow for 15 generations. We've never changed a single scale of the process." "And in all that time," Jack pressed, "has there ever been any unexpected effects? Any incidents where the magic might have behaved strangely?" Ginger's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Why do you ask?" Jack shrugged, his face a mask of innocent curiosity. "Just trying to understand the full picture." Mayor Kringle seemed concerned about the old magics. I wondered if there might be a reason for that concern. The dragon was quiet for a moment, her golden eyes distant. "Well, there was one time, many years ago. My great-great-grandmother told me about it. There was a winter, colder than any in memory. The magic in Mary Hollow was acting up, toys coming to life when they shouldn't, candy canes growing to the size of trees. And the cocoa, well, they say it started showing people visions. The past, the future, their deepest desires and fears." Holly gasped. "That's incredible. What happened?" Ginger shook her head. "Nobody knows for sure. The stories say that the town elders came together and did some kind of ritual. After that, everything went back to normal. But my great-great-grandmother always said that the magic never quite felt the same after that. Like it had been muzzled, somehow." Holly, noticing Jack's intense interest, filed this information away for later consideration. There was still so much she didn't know about her mysterious new partner, and his fascination with ancient magic was intriguing. "Ginger," Holly said, steering the conversation back to the matter at hand, "did the mayor say anything else about why he wanted to make these changes? Or about any other plans he had?" The dragon's expression darkened. "He didn't say much else. But he did mention something about balancing the scales. Whatever that means. And he seemed worried. More worried than I've ever seen him." Holly nodded, her mind racing with this new information. "Thank you, Ginger. You've been incredibly helpful." As they turned to leave, Ginger called out to them. "Wait." They looked back to see the dragon holding out 2 steaming mugs of cocoa. "On the house. You look like you could use it." Gratefully, Holly. Jack nodded slowly. "That's not a bad idea. It might also give us a chance to observe the townspeople, see if anyone acts suspiciously when we discuss the case." As they approached the town square, Holly's eyes were drawn once again to the darkened Christmas tree. Its unlit branches seemed to reach out like grasping fingers, a silent reminder of the threat looming over their home. "We need to dig deeper," Holly said, determination stealing her voice. "There's more to this mystery than a simple murder. We need to understand the old magics of Mary Hollow if we're going to have any hope of solving this and saving our town." Jack nodded, his icy eyes reflecting the determination in Holly's voice. "Agreed. But where do we start?" Who in Merry Hollow would have knowledge of these ancient powers? Holly thought for a moment, then smiled. I think I know just the person. Or should I say, the snowman. As they set off towards the home of Frosty, Snowman, Merry Hollow's oldest resident and keeper of the town's historical records, Holly couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover secrets that had been buried in the snow for centuries. The cocoa ginger had given them still warmed her from the inside, that spark of ancient magic seeming to pulse in time with her heartbeat. Whatever revelations awaited them, she hoped they were prepared for the consequences. The fate of Merry Hollow, and perhaps the very nature of Christmas magic itself, hung in the balance. Chapter 7, Dusting Off History. The Merry Hollow Town Hall stood at the heart of the square, its gingerbread facade adorned with peppermint columns and frosting trim. As Holly and Jack approached, the building seemed to loom larger than usual, its candy cane shutters like half-closed eyes watching their approach. I've never seen the town hall look so imposing, Holly murmured, suppressing a shiver that had nothing to do with the perpetual winter chill. Jack nodded, his icy blue eyes scanning the building. It's as if the very architecture is aware of the gravity of our mission. They climbed the gumdrop steps and pushed open the heavy gingerbread doors. The usual bustle of town business was subdued, with only a few elves scurrying about, their pointed ears drooping with worry. Holly led the way to a small door tucked behind the grand staircase, labeled Archives in spidery golden script. I haven't been down here since I was an elfling, Holly admitted as she turned the candy cane-striped doorknob. It always gave me the creeps. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Jack produced a small, glowing ice crystal from his pocket, its soft blue light illuminating the way. As they descended, the air grew colder and heavy with the scent of old parchment and dust. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a vast room lined with towering shelves. Scrolls, books, and boxes filled every available space, their labels faded with age. A thick layer of dust covered everything, sparkling in the light of Jack's crystal. Where do we even begin? Holly wondered aloud, her voice hushed in the cavernous space. Jack ran a finger along one of the shelves, leaving a trail in the dust. We need to start with the oldest records. Look for anything mentioning the founding of Merry Hollow or early magical practices. They split up, each taking a section of the archives. Holly found herself surrounded by ancient ledgers, their pages brittle with age. She carefully opened one, coughing as a cloud of dust rose from its pages. As she flipped through the ledger, Holly's eyes widened at the detailed accounts of Merry Hollow's early days. There were records of the first toy workshop, the planting of the great Christmas tree, and the establishment of the candy cane farm. But what caught her attention most were the frequent references to a Yuletide council that seemed to make all the important decisions in the town's early years. Jack, she called out, have you ever heard of a Yuletide council? He appeared from behind a stack of boxes, brushing cobwebs from his frosty hair. Can't say that I have. What does the ledger say about them? Holly scanned the pages. Not much in detail. Just that they were responsible for maintaining the balance of Christmas magic and safeguarding the town's most precious secrets. It sounds like they were some kind of governing body, but I've never heard them mentioned in any of our current history books. Jack's brow furrowed. Interesting. I wonder why they've been forgotten or erased from Merry Hollow's official history. Before Holly could respond, Jack's eyes lit up. Holly, he called, I think I've found something. She made her way over to him, navigating around teetering piles of documents. Jack was holding a scroll, its edges crumbling slightly in his cold grip. Look at this, he said, unrolling it carefully. It's a record of the town's founding. And here, the first mention of the enchanted snow globe. Holly leaned in, squinting at the faded script. And upon the eve of the first Christmas, she read aloud, the great wizard Noel did present unto the people a wondrous globe of snow. Within its crystalline depths swirled the very essence of Yuletide cheer, and so long as it remained whole and pure, Merry Hollow would know eternal Christmas. A magical artifact of immense power, Jack mused, his eyes gleaming with interest. I wonder where it's kept now. Holly frowned. I've never heard of this snow globe before. You'd think something so important would be common knowledge. As she spoke, a particularly thick cloud of dust swirled up from the scroll, tickling her nose. Holly felt a sneeze building and tried to stifle it, but to no avail. Ah. Achoo. The force of her sneeze sent a shockwave of magic through the room, causing scrolls to roll off shelves and books to flutter open. Bless you, Jack said, a hint of amusement in his voice. He produced a handkerchief seemingly from thin air, offering it to Holly. Thanks, she sniffled, taking the handkerchief. It was cool to the touch and smelled faintly of peppermint. Oh no. Look at this mess. But as they surveyed the chaos Holly's magical sneeze had caused, Jack's eyes widened. Wait a moment. Look there. But as they surveyed the chaos Holly's magical sneeze had caused, Jack's eyes widened. Wait a moment. Look there. A chronicle of magical disturbances in Merry Hollow, she read. Jack, this could be exactly what we need. They carefully lifted the book and brought it to a nearby table. As they pored over its pages, a troubling pattern emerged. Every few decades, it seemed, Merry Hollow experienced a period of magical instability. Toys would come to life unexpectedly, weather patterns would go haywire, and in one particularly disturbing incident, all the candy canes in town tried to uproot themselves and march away. This is fascinating, Jack murmured, his finger tracing a line of text. It seems these disturbances always coincide with particularly harsh winters. And look here, each time, the town elders performed some kind of ritual to restore balance. Holly nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. But the details of the ritual are never described. It's always referred to as the ancient rite or the sacred ceremony. Why all the secrecy? Jack's expression was thoughtful. Powerful magic often requires secrecy to maintain its potency. It's possible that knowledge of the ritual is passed down only to a select few. Holly glanced at him, surprised. You seem to know a lot about magical artifacts and rituals, Jack. Care to share where you gained all this knowledge? A flicker of something, hesitation? Concern? Passed over Jack's face, but it was gone so quickly Holly wasn't sure she'd seen it at all. I've traveled widely, he said smoothly. One picks up bits and pieces of lore here and there. Holly wasn't entirely satisfied with this explanation, but before she could press further, a glint of gold caught her eye. Tucked between the pages of the chronicle was a folded piece of parchment, sealed with a wax stamp in the shape of a snowflake. What's this? She wondered, carefully breaking the seal. As the parchment unfolded, they realized they were looking at Merry Hollow's original town charter. The script was elaborate, decorated with intricate drawings of holly and ivy. But it was the content that made Holly's eyes widen in surprise. Jack, look at this, she said, pointing to a particular clause. The magic of Merry Hollow shall be maintained through the harmony of fire and ice, of giving and receiving, of joy and solemnity. Should this balance ever falter, the very foundations of our eternal Christmas shall be at risk. Jack leaned in, his cool breath tickling Holly's ear. Interesting. And look here, in the margins. There's a note about the snow globe, the heart of our magic, to be protected at all costs. Its location known only to the Keeper of Secrets. The Keeper of Secrets? Holly repeated. I've never heard of such a position in Merry Hollow. Perhaps it's another title that's been lost to time, Jack suggested. Or kept hidden, like the details of the balancing ritual. As they continued to examine the charter, Holly couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of uncovering something monumental. The pieces of the puzzle were there, the snow globe, the magical disturbances, the secret rituals, but how did they all fit together? And more importantly, how were they connected to Mayor Kringle's murder and the darkening of the great Christmas tree? We need to find out more about this keeper of secrets, Holly said decisively. And we need to locate that snow globe. I have a feeling it's at the heart of everything that's happening. Jack nodded, carefully refolding the town charter. Agreed. But we should tread carefully. If this information has been kept secret for so long, there may be those who don't want it uncovered. They spent the next hour combing through more documents, searching for any additional mentions of the Keeper of Secrets or the enchanted snow globe. Their efforts yielded a few tantalizing clues, references to a hidden chamber beneath the great Christmas tree. They burst through the archive door, slamming it shut behind them. The sounds immediately ceased, leaving them standing in the town hall foyer, panting and wide-eyed. What was that? Holly gasped, clutching her satchel tightly. Jack shook his head, his silver hair gleaming in the warm light of the foyer. I'm not sure. But I think we've stirred up something that's been dormant for a very long time. As they left the town hall, stepping back into the perpetual winter wonderland of Merry Hollow's streets, Holly couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a threshold. The town around them seemed different somehow, the twinkling lights and cheerful decorations a thin veneer over something ancient and potentially dangerous. We need to be careful, Holly said as they walked, her voice low. Whatever's happening in Merry Hollow, it's bigger than just a murder. We're dealing with forces we don't fully understand. Jack nodded, his expression grave. You're right. But we can't stop now. The safety of Merry Hollow depends on us uncovering the truth. As they made their way back to Holly's gingerbread cottage to review their findings, neither of them noticed the small, dark figure watching from the shadows of a nearby alley. Its eyes glowed with an eerie blue light, and as it watched Holly and Jack disappear around a corner, it melted into the shadows, leaving no trace behind but a faint whisper on the wind. The mystery of Merry Hollow was deepening, its roots stretching back through centuries of hidden history. And as the eternal Christmas lights twinkled overhead, there was a sense that time was running out. Whatever dark forces were at work, they were gathering strength. Holly and Jack would need all their wit, magic, and courage to face what was coming, and to save the very spirit of Christmas itself. Chapter 8, Secrets in the Archives. The next morning dawned gray and cold over Merry Hollow, the usual twinkling lights seeming dimmer in the weak winter sunlight. Holly Evergreen stood at her kitchen window, sipping a mug of peppermint tea and watching the town slowly come to life. Her mind was still whirling with the discoveries they'd made in the archives the day before. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. She opened it to find Jack Frost standing on her doorstep, a leather satchel slung over his shoulder. Ready for another deep dive into Merry Hollow's history, he asked, a glimmer of excitement in his icy blue eyes. Holly nodded, grabbing her witch's hat and her own bag of supplies. I've packed some snacks and a thermos of hot cocoa. Something tells me we're in for a long day. As they made their way back to the town hall, Holly couldn't help but notice how the townspeople seemed to shrink away from them, whispers following in their wake. The fear and uncertainty that had gripped Merry Hollow since Mayor Kringle's death was palpable. We need to solve this quickly, Holly murmured to Jack. The town can't go on like this much longer. Jack nodded grimly. Agreed. Let's hope the archives hold the answers we need. They slipped into the town hall and made their way back to the archive room. This time, they came prepared with magical lanterns that cast a warm, steady light over the dusty shelves. Holly also cast a quick charm to keep the dust at bay, preventing any more magical sneezing fits. Where should we start? Holly asked, surveying the vast collection of documents before them. Jack pulled out the town charter they'd discovered the day before. I think we need to focus on this snow globe. It seems to be at the center of everything, but we know so little about it. They set to work, methodically combing through every document that mentioned the mysterious artifact. Hours passed as they pieced together its history, bit by tantalizing bit. Look at this, Holly said, excitement coloring her voice. She was holding a fragile scroll, its edges crumbling with age. It's some kind of prophecy about the snow globe. Jack leaned in close, his cool presence a stark contrast to the stuffy archive room. Holly read aloud. When Yuletide cheer begins to wane, and darkness threatens joy's domain, the globe of snow shall light the way. But beware the price that must be paid. For power comes at great cost. And what is gained may yet be lost. The tree of light and globe of snow together hold the power to grow, or break the spell of endless cheer, and bring about the final year. A heavy silence fell between them as the weight of the prophecy sank in. Jack's brow furrowed in concentration. It seems to be suggesting that the snow globe and the great Christmas tree are connected somehow, and that they have the power to either maintain Merry Hollow's eternal Christmas, or end it. Holly nodded, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with Jack's icy presence. But what's this about a price that must be paid? And the final year? It sounds ominous. As Holly pondered the prophecy's words, she felt a sudden tingling in her fingertips. It was a sensation she recognized, the precursor to a magical flash of insight. She closed her eyes, letting the feeling wash over her. In her mind's eye, she saw a series of images flashing rapidly: the darkened Christmas tree, Mayor Kringle's frozen body, the mysterious financial transfers, the whispers in the archive room. Suddenly, it all seemed to connect. "Jack," she exclaimed, her eyes flying open. "I think I understand. The mayor was trying to protect Merry Hollow. He must have discovered something about the snow globe, maybe that its power was fading, or that it was becoming dangerous. That's why he was trying to change things, to move away from the old magical practices." Jack's eyes widened. And someone didn't want him to succeed. Someone who had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, no matter the cost. Holly nodded vigorously. "Exactly. But who? And why?" Their conversation was interrupted by Jack's discovery of a hefty tome hidden behind a false panel in one of the bookshelves. The book's cover was made of dark leather, embossed with a symbol neither of them recognized, a snowflake intertwined with a flame. As they pored over its pages, a troubling picture began to emerge. The book detailed a schism that had occurred in Merry Hollow's past, nearly 2 centuries ago. It seemed there had been a fierce debate over the use of the town's magical resources. One faction wanted to expand Merry Hollow's influence, to spread Christmas cheer to the outside world, Holly read. But the other insisted on maintaining isolation, arguing that exposure to the outside world would dilute and eventually destroy their magical way of life. Jack seemed particularly interested in the descriptions of the magical practices each side employed. "Fascinating," he murmured, his finger tracing a diagram of a complex spell. "I've never seen magic quite like this before. It's as if they found a way to blend different magical traditions into something entirely new." Holly glanced at him, a flicker of suspicion crossing her mind. Jack's knowledge of magical theory seemed unusually extensive for someone who claimed to have picked up bits and pieces in his travels. But before she could question him further, something else caught her eye. "Jack, look at this," she said, pointing to a passage near the end of the book. "It talks about a secret society formed by those who wanted to maintain Merry Hollow's isolation. They called themselves the Guardians of Yuletide." Jack's eyebrows shot up. "The Guardians of Yuletide? Do you think they could still exist today?" Holly bit her lip, thinking hard. "It's possible. If they've managed to keep themselves secret all this time, they could be behind everything that's happening. Maybe Mayor Kringle discovered their existence and was trying to stop them." As they continued to dig deeper, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The Guardians of Yuletide seemed to have been responsible for many of the town's most closely guarded secrets, including the location of the enchanted snow globe and the rituals used to maintain Merry Hollow's magical balance. If this society still exists, Jack mused, they would have a powerful motive for wanting to keep things as they are. Any change, any exposure to the outside world, could threaten their power and the very foundations of Mary Hollow's magic. Holly nodded, a chill running down her spine. And they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stood in their way, even the mayor. As the day wore on, Holly and Jack compiled a substantial amount of evidence pointing to the continued existence of the Guardians of Yuletide. There were coded messages hidden in town records, subtle references in official documents, and even a few names that appeared suspiciously often in connection with magical disturbances. But just as they felt they were on the verge of a breakthrough, Jack made a troubling discovery. "Holly," he said, his voice tight with concern, "come look at this." He was standing in front of a shelf that had been full of records from the past 50 years. Now, several key volumes were missing. "I don't understand," Holly said, her heart sinking. "Those books were here just a few hours ago. I remember seeing them when we first came in." Jack's expression was grim. "It seems we're not the only ones interested in Mary Hollow's secrets. Someone else has been here, someone who doesn't want us to find out the whole truth." Holly felt a chill that had nothing to do with the perpetual winter outside. "Do you think we're in danger, Jack?" He met her gaze, his icy blue eyes serious. "I think we need to be very careful from here on out. We're dealing with people who have kept their secrets for centuries. They won't give them up easily." As they prepared to leave the archives, gathering up the most crucial documents to take with them, Holly couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper than before, and she could have sworn she heard the faint sound of whispering just at the edge of her hearing. "Jack," she said softly as they climbed the stairs back to the main floor of the town hall, "what do we do now? If the Guardians of Yuletide really are behind all this, how can we hope to stop them?" Jack was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he said, "We need more information. And I think I know where we might find it. There's someone in Mary Hollow who's been here longer than anyone, someone who might know more about the town's history than even these archives can tell us." Holly's eyes widened as she realized who he meant. "Frosty, snowman," she breathed. Chapter 9, A Bitter Taste. They set off towards Frosty, Snowman's home on the outskirts of town, unaware that their every move was being watched by unseen eyes. In the shadows of Mary Hollow, ancient powers were stirring, and the stage was being set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of the eternal Christmas town to its very core. As she approached the bakery, something felt off. The cheerful glow that usually emanated from the windows was absent, and the air lacked its usual scent of cinnamon and sugar. A knot of dread formed in Holly's stomach as she quickened her pace. When she reached the door, her worst fears were confirmed. The gingerbread facade was cracked and crumbling, the gumdrop doorknob hanging limply from a single candy cane nail. Holly's hand trembled as she pushed the door open, wincing at the ominous creak that echoed through the silent shop. "Oh, sugar plums," she gasped as she took in the scene before her. The bakery was in shambles. Display cases lay shattered, their magical treats scattered across the floor. The enchanted mixing bowls were overturned, their contents splattered on the walls in a mockery of festive decorations. But worst of all were the gingerbread men. Dozens of them lay in pieces, their little icing faces frozen in expressions of terror. Holly felt her knees go weak, and she leaned against the counter for support. Who could have done this? And why? As she surveyed the damage, her eyes fell on something that made her blood run cold. There, on the far wall, written in what looked horribly like red icing, was a message. "Stop digging, or the next thing to crumble will be you." Holly's hand shook as she reached for her wand, casting a quick detection spell. The magical residue around the message pulsed with a sickly purple light, the same color they had seen in the archives when examining records of magical disturbances. Without thinking, Holly pulled out her communication crystal and called Jack. His frosty face appeared in the crystal's surface, his expression changing from neutral to concerned as he took in Holly's distressed state. "Holly? What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. "Jack," Holly said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "someone's broken into the bakery. It's bad. Can you come?" "I'll be right there," Jack replied, his image disappearing from the crystal. As Holly waited for Jack to arrive, she forced herself to take a closer look at the damage. Her heart ached as she saw the ruins of her precious magical creations. The self-frosting cupcakes lay in sad, deflated heaps, their sparkles dim and lifeless. The ever-warm gingerbread house, which had always filled the bakery with the scent of spices, was now a cold, crumbled mess. In one corner, she found her prized possession, an antique rolling pin passed down through generations of magical bakers in her family. It was snapped clean in two, the break jagged and unnatural. Holly picked up the pieces, cradling them gently. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a targeted attack on everything she held dear. True to his word, Jack arrived at the bakery in record time, a flurry of snowflakes announcing his presence. He took in the scene with a sharp intake of breath, his icy blue eyes narrowing as they fell on the threatening message. "Oh, Holly," he said softly, turning to her. "I'm so sorry." To her own surprise, Holly felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had always prided herself on her strength, on being the one who held Merry Hollow together with her cheerful demeanor and delicious treats. But seeing her beloved bakery in ruins, targeted because of their investigation, was too much. Jack hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. His embrace was cool but comforting, like the first snowfall of winter. Holly leaned into him, letting out a shuddering breath. "It's going to be okay," Jack murmured, his chin resting on top of her head. "We'll fix this, and we'll find who did it. I promise." After a few moments, Holly pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Thank you, Jack," she said, managing a small smile. "You're right. We can't let this stop us." Together, they began the task of cleaning up the bakery. Jack used his ice magic to sweep up the shattered glass and splintered wood, forming it into neat piles that could be easily disposed of. Holly focused on salvaging what treats she could and assessing the damage to her magical baking equipment. As they worked, they talked, discussing their findings from the archives and theorizing about who might be behind the vandalism. "It has to be connected to the Guardians of Yuletide," Holly said as she carefully pieced together a broken gingerbread house. "The magical signature is the same as what we saw in those old records." Jack nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration as he used a beam of ice to lift a heavy shelf back into place. "I agree. But why target your bakery? Why not the archives, or the town hall?" Holly paused, considering. Maybe it's because the bakery is the heart of Merry Hollow in a way. It's where everyone comes together, where we celebrate our traditions. By attacking it, they're sending a message to the whole town. "That makes sense," Jack said. "They're trying to intimidate not just us, but everyone. Keep people scared and compliant." As they continued to clean, Holly found herself watching Jack more closely. There was something about the way he moved through the wreckage, his eyes darting here and there, that seemed almost familiar. As if he had seen destruction like this before. "Jack," Holly said hesitantly, "have you ever encountered anything like this in your travels? This level of magical vandalism, I mean." Jack paused in his work, a shadow passing over his face. "I've seen my fair share of dark magic," he said quietly. "But this feels personal. Whoever did this knows you, Holly. Knows what would hurt you the most." His words sent a chill down Holly's spine. The idea that someone in Merry Hollow, someone she might know and trust, could be behind this was almost too much to bear. As Jack turned to gather more debris, something fell from his pocket, landing with a soft thud on the flour-dusted floor. Holly's eyes widened as she caught sight of it, a small, intricately carved piece of ice that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Jack quickly scooped it up, tucking it back into his pocket, but not before Holly got a good look at it. The design etched into its surface was hauntingly familiar, the same intertwined snowflake and flame symbol they had seen in the archives, associated with the Guardians of Yuletide. Holly felt her heart rate quicken, but she forced herself to act natural, pretending she hadn't seen anything. But inside, her mind was racing. Why did Jack have an artifact clearly connected to the very group they were investigating? Was it possible that he was somehow involved with the Guardians? She thought back to all the times Jack had shown an unusually deep knowledge of magical theory and artifacts. His intense interest in the old practices they had uncovered in the archives. The way he had appeared in Merry Hollow just as the troubles began. For the first time since they had started working together, Holly felt a flicker of real doubt about Jack Frost. Was it possible that the person she had come to trust, to care for even, was not who he claimed to be? As they finished cleaning up the bakery, Holly's mind was whirling with questions and suspicions. She knew she couldn't confront Jack directly. If he was involved with the Guardians, it could be dangerous. But she also knew she couldn't ignore what she had seen. "Thank you for your help, Jack," Holly said as they stood back to survey their work. The bakery was far from its former glory, but at least it was clean and orderly once more. Jack smiled, a genuine warmth in his icy eyes that made Holly's heart ache with confusion. "Of course, Holly. That's what partners are for, right?" Partners. The word hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken questions and growing suspicions. "Right," Holly replied, forcing a smile. Partners. As Jack prepared to leave, promising to return in the morning to help with repairs, Holly's mind was already formulating a plan. She needed answers, and she knew just where to start looking for them. "Be careful going home," Jack said, pausing at the door. "Whoever did this might still be out there." Holly nodded, touched by his concern despite her suspicions. "I will. You be careful too, Jack." As she watched him disappear into the snowy night, Holly felt a resolve hardening within her. Tomorrow, while Jack was busy helping with the bakery repairs, she would pay a visit to Frosty, Snowman. If anyone in one particularly vivid dream, she found herself standing before the great Christmas tree in the town square. Its branches were bare and lifeless, but at its base sat the enchanted snow globe they had read about in the archives. As she reached out to touch it, the globe began to crack, a dark, oily substance seeping out and spreading across the snow. Holly tried to run, but her feet were frozen in place. Just as the darkness was about to engulf her, she saw a figure approaching through the gloom, Jack Frost, his hand outstretched, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Holly woke with a start, her heart pounding. The dream had felt so real, so vivid. Was it just her subconscious working through her fears, or was it something more, a warning, perhaps, from the deep magic of Merry Hollow itself? As she got ready for the day ahead, Holly steeled herself for what was to come. She would go to the bakery, work alongside Jack as planned, and then make her excuses to visit Frosty, Snowman. Whatever secrets Jack was hiding, whatever connection he might have to the Guardians of Yuletide, she was determined to uncover the truth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and, hopefully, some much-needed answers. But as Holly left her cottage, stepping out into the crisp morning air of Merry Hollow, one question burned brighter than all the others: who was Jack Frost, really? And could she trust him with the fate of Merry Hollow, and her heart? The stage was set for revelations that would shake the foundations of the eternal Christmas town. And as Holly made her way through the snow-covered streets, she couldn't help but feel that she was walking towards a confrontation that would change everything. The truth about Jack Frost, the Guardians of Yuletide, and the very nature of Merry Hollow's magic was waiting to be uncovered, if only she had the courage to face it. As Holly approached her bakery with determination in her steps, the weight of the impending revelations pressed heavily upon her. The day ahead promised challenges beyond anything she had imagined, with the fate of Merry Hollow hanging in the balance. Her choices in the coming hours would determine not just the future of the town, but the very essence of Christmas magic itself. The gentle tinkling of the bakery's bell as she pushed open the door seemed to herald the beginning of this crucial day. Holly took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scents of cinnamon and sugar that had somehow survived the previous night's destruction. She steeled herself for what was to come, knowing that by the day's end, nothing in Merry Hollow might ever be the same again. As she began the process of assessing the damage and planning the bakery's restoration, Holly's mind was already racing ahead to her planned visit with Frosty, Snowman. Whatever secrets lay buried in the snowy depths of Merry Hollow's past, she was determined to uncover them. And as the first rays of the winter sun began to filter through the frosted windows, Holly Evergreen prepared herself for a day that would test not only her magical abilities, but also her heart. Chapter 10, Melting Farcades. The day of restoration work at the Gingerbread Cottage Bakery had been long and exhausting. As the sun began to set over Merry Hollow, casting long shadows across the snow-covered streets, Holly Evergreen found herself both physically and emotionally drained. Yet, there was still one crucial task ahead of her. "Jack," she said, trying to keep her voice casual as they finished up the last of the repairs, "I was thinking, would you like to come over for dinner tonight? As a thank you for all your help." Jack looked up, surprise and pleasure mingling in his icy blue eyes. "That would be wonderful, Holly. Thank you." As they walked to Holly's cottage, the streets of Merry Hollow seemed quieter than usual. The eternal Christmas lights twinkled overhead, but their cheerful glow felt at odds with the tension Holly could feel building inside her. Holly's cottage was a cozy haven, decorated with festive garlands and twinkling fairy lights. As they entered, the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the air. Holly had prepared a traditional Merry Hollow feast, complete with roast turkey, magical never-melting ice cream, and her famous gingerbread cookies. As they sat down to eat, Holly began her subtle interrogation. "You know, Jack," she said, carefully keeping her tone light, "we've been working together for a while now, but I realize I don't know much about your background. Where did you say you were from again?" Jack paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Oh, you know," he said vaguely, "here and there. I've traveled a lot." Holly nodded, pressing further. "And your family? Are they travelers too?" A shadow passed over Jack's face. I don't really talk about my family," he said, his voice suddenly cold. As the meal progressed, Holly continued to probe, asking about Jack's magical training, his knowledge of ancient artifacts, his reasons for coming to Merry Hollow. With each question, Jack grew more evasive, his answers becoming increasingly vague and contradictory. Finally, as they were finishing dessert, Holly couldn't contain herself any longer. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I saw something fall from your pocket yesterday at the bakery. An artifact with the symbol of the Guardians of Yuletide on it." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jack's face went completely still, his eyes hardening to chips of ice. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said flatly. "Don't lie to me," Holly said, her voice rising. "I saw it with my own eyes." "Why do you have it? What's your connection to the Guardians?" Jack stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous. I've done nothing but help you since I arrived in Merry Hollow. How dare you accuse me of—" "Of what?" Holly interrupted, standing to face him. "Of lying? Of hiding things? Because that's exactly what you've been doing, Jack. I trusted you. I thought we were partners. But now I don't even know who you really are." The tension in the room was palpable, crackling like static electricity in the air. Jack paced back and forth, running a hand through his frost-white hair. "You don't understand," he said, his voice slow and intense. "There are things at stake here that you can't possibly comprehend." "Then help me understand," Holly cried, frustration and hurt coloring her voice. "Tell me the truth, Jack. All of it. Or I swear by the star on the great Christmas tree, our partnership is over. I'll continue this investigation on my own." For a long moment, Jack was silent, his back to Holly as he stared out the window at the snowy streets of Merry Hollow. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was a mixture of resignation and something that looked almost like fear. "You're right," he said softly. "I haven't been entirely honest with you. But it's not because I wanted to deceive you, Holly. It's because the truth is complicated. And dangerous." Holly felt her heart pounding in her chest. "I can handle complicated," she said. "And I'm not afraid of danger. Just tell me who you really are, Jack." Jack took a deep breath, his eyes meeting Holly's with an intensity that made her shiver. "I'm not who you think I am," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Chapter 11, Counsel and Consequences. The silence that followed Jack's revelation seemed to stretch for an eternity. Holly stared at him, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. "I'm not who you think I am," he had said, and now those words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "What do you mean, Jack?" Holly finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you're not who I think you are, then who are you?" Jack took a deep breath, his icy blue eyes meeting Holly's with an intensity that made her shiver. "I'm an investigator," he said slowly, "sent here on a mission of utmost importance." Holly felt her heart racing. "An investigator? Sent by whom?" "By an organization known as the Magical Realm Council," Jack replied, his voice slow and serious. Holly couldn't help but let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "The Magical Realm Council? But that's impossible. The council is just a myth, a story we tell elflings to make them behave." Jack shook his head, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's very real, Holly. And it's been watching Merry Hollow for a long time." Anger flared in Holly's chest, hot and sudden. "So everything was a lie? Our partnership, our friendship?" She spat the last word out, hating how it made her voice catch. "No," Jack said forcefully, taking a step towards her. "My feelings for you, my desire to help Merry Hollow, those are real. But yes, I came here with a purpose, a mission from the council." Holly sank into a chair, feeling as if the floor had dropped out from under her. "I want to know everything," she said, her voice steely with determination. "No more half-truths, no more evasions. Start at the beginning. What exactly is this Magical Realm Council?" Jack nodded, running a hand through his frost-white hair. He began to pace the room, gathering his thoughts. The Magical Realm Council is an ancient organization, older than Merry Hollow itself. It oversees the use of magic across all realms, ensuring that the balance of power is maintained. "All realms?" Holly interjected. "You mean there are other magical places besides Merry Hollow?" Jack smiled wryly. "Many more than you can imagine. Merry Hollow is unique in its focus on Christmas magic, but it's far from the only magical enclave in existence." Holly's mind reeled with this information. All her life, she had believed that Merry Hollow was a singular beacon of magic in an otherwise mundane world. The idea that there were other magical realms out there was both thrilling and terrifying. "So this council," she pressed, "what exactly do they do? And why have they sent you here?" Jack's expression grew serious once more. "The council's primary function is to ensure that magic is used responsibly, that no one realm or group becomes too powerful. They monitor magical activity across the realms, intervening when necessary to prevent catastrophes." "And Merry Hollow?" Holly asked, dreading the answer. "Why are we of interest to the council?" Jack hesitated for a moment before responding. Merry Hollow has been a concern for centuries, he admitted. The concentration of Christmas magic here is unprecedented. The eternal winter, the ability to bend reality to create toys and treats, it's all incredibly powerful magic. Magic that, in the wrong hands, could be catastrophic. Holly felt a chill that had nothing to do with Jack's icy presence. Are you saying that Merry Hollow is dangerous? Not inherently, Jack assured her quickly. But the potential is there. And recently, there have been disturbances in the magical fields surrounding Merry Hollow. Spikes of power that suggest forbidden spells are being used. Forbidden spells? Holly echoed, her voice rising in alarm. What kind of forbidden spells? Jack's face was grim. Spells that manipulate time and space, that alter the fundamental fabric of reality. The kind of magic that could, if unchecked, tear holes between realms or worse. Holly's mind whirled with the implications. And the council thinks someone in Merry Hollow is using these spells? But who? And why? That's what I was sent here to find out, Jack explained. The death of Mayor Kringle and the darkening of the Great Tree, they're symptoms of a deeper problem. Someone, or some group, is meddling with forces they don't understand, and the consequences could be dire not just for Merry Hollow, but for all the magical realms. As Jack continued to explain, detailing the council's concerns and the potential consequences of uncontrolled Christmas magic, Holly felt her world shifting beneath her feet. Everything she had believed about Merry Hollow, about the innocence of their eternal Christmas, was being called into question. Why didn't you tell me all this from the beginning? She asked, hurt and betrayal coloring her voice. We could have worked together openly. Jack's expression was pained. I wanted to, Holly. But council missions are classified for a reason. If word got out that we were investigating, whoever is behind these disturbances might have gone to ground. And I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you knew who I really was, you wouldn't trust me. That you'd see me as an outsider, a threat to Merry Hollow. Holly stood up abruptly, pacing the room. Her emotions were a tangled mess, anger at being deceived, fear for what this meant for her beloved town, and, most confusingly, a lingering affection for Jack that she couldn't quite shake. Your methods were wrong, she said finally, turning to face him. Lying, sneaking around, how is that any better than what the Guardians of Yuletide are doing? Jack flinched at the comparison. You're right, he admitted. I should have found a way to be more honest with you. I got caught up in the investigation, in working with you. I didn't want to ruin that. They argued back and forth for what felt like hours, hashing out the ethics of Jack's deception, the potential dangers facing Merry Hollow, and what it all meant for their investigation. Holly peppered Jack with questions about the council, about his own background, about the true extent of the magical world beyond Merry Hollow's borders. So all this time, Holly said, her voice tinged with wonder and frustration, while we've been celebrating our eternal Christmas, there's been this whole network of magical realms out there? Realms that might be in danger because of what's happening here? Jack nodded solemnly. The magic of Merry Hollow is powerful, Holly. More powerful than most of your residents realize. It's not just about making toys and treats, the pure concentration of belief and joy here has the potential to reshape reality itself. That's why the council has been watching for so long. Holly shook her head, still struggling to come to terms with everything she had learned. I just can't believe that someone in Merry Hollow would deliberately use forbidden magic. We're a peaceful town. All we want is to spread Christmas cheer. I know, Jack said gently. And that's what makes this situation so dangerous. Whoever is behind this might not even realize the full consequences of their actions. They might think they're doing something good for Merry Hollow, not understanding that they're putting everything at risk. As the night wore on, Holly felt her anger slowly giving way to a grudging understanding. The magnitude of what they were facing, not just a murder and some magical disturbances, but a threat to the very fabric of magical reality, was beginning to sink in. "Okay," she said finally, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows. "I think I understand why you did what you did. I don't like it, but I understand. The question is, where do we go from here?" Jack looked at her hopefully. "We still have a case to solve. The threat to Mary Hollow is real, regardless of who I am or who sent me. Can we still work together?" Holly considered for a long moment. Despite everything, she knew that Jack's help would be invaluable in uncovering the truth behind Mayor Kringle's death and the magical disturbances. And a small, traitorous part of her heart didn't want to let him go. "All right," she said finally. "We can continue working together. But things have to change. I want full transparency from now on. No more secrets, no more hidden agendas. You tell me." The clock on Holly's mantel chimed, marking the start of a new hour. Outside, the streets of Mary Hollow were coming to life, its residents unaware of the momentous conversation that had just taken place or the dangers that lurked beneath the cheerful surface of their eternal Christmas. Holly and Jack exchanged a look of determination. It was time to get to work. The real investigation was about to begin, and the fate of not just Mary Hollow, but all magical realms, hung in the balance. Chapter 12, Guardians of the Past. As the morning sun climbed higher over Mary Hollow, Holly and Jack sat surrounded by a sea of documents, magical artifacts, and hastily scribbled notes. They had transformed Holly's cozy living room into an impromptu investigation headquarters, with charts and timelines pinned to every available surface. "Okay," Holly said, rubbing her tired eyes. "Let's go over everything we know about the Guardians of Yuletide one more time." Jack nodded, picking up a parchment covered in his neat, frosty handwriting. "From what we've uncovered in the archives and pieced together from town legends, the Guardians of Yuletide seem to have formed around the time of Mary Hollow's founding." Holly added, "Right, and their original purpose appears to have been protecting the town's magical secrets and maintaining the eternal Christmas spell." They had spent hours compiling every scrap of information they could find about the secret society. Now, laid out before them, was a comprehensive timeline of Mary Hollow's magical history, with special attention paid to any events that might have involved the Guardians. "Look at this pattern," Jack said, pointing to a cluster of dates on their timeline. "Every few decades, there's a spike in unusual magical activity, followed by a period of increased secrecy in the town records." Holly leaned in, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You're right. And each of these spikes seems to coincide with some kind of threat to Mary Hollow's traditions or isolation." As they examined the timeline more closely, a troubling picture began to emerge. The Guardians of Yuletide appeared to have been involved in numerous pivotal moments in Mary Hollow's history, always working in the shadows to maintain the status quo. "Look at this entry from 1892, Holly said, tapping a yellowed newspaper clipping. There was a movement to open trade relations with a nearby non-magical town. But it was suddenly abandoned after the lead councilman had a change of heart and several pro-trade residents mysteriously left town." Jack's eyes narrowed. "And here, in 1957, when there was talk of modernizing some of the toy-making magic. The workshop that proposed the changes burned down in an accident, and the issue was never raised again." As they continued to connect the dots, Holly felt a chill that had nothing to do with Jack's icy presence. "Jack," she said slowly, "if the Guardians have been manipulating events for this long, what do you think their motives are now? Why kill Mayor Kringle and disrupt the town's magic?" Jack leaned back, his face thoughtful. "Based on their past actions, it seems the Guardians are deeply committed to preserving Mary Hollow's isolation and traditional practices. Perhaps Mayor Kringle was planning changes that they saw as a threat?" Holly nodded, remembering their conversation with Ginger Snapdragon. He did mention wanting to modernize some of the town's magical practices. But surely that's not enough reason for murder. Unless, Jack said, his voice low, the mayor discovered something about the Guardians themselves. Something they desperately wanted to keep hidden. As they theorized about the society's possible motives, Holly found herself examining the list of suspected Guardian members they had compiled. Her heart sank as she recognized several names. Jack, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, some of these people, they're respected town elders. Pixie Sugarplum, she runs the orphanage. And Cornelius Candy Cane, he's been on the town council for decades. I've known them my whole life. How could they be involved in something like this? Jack placed a comforting hand on Holly's shoulder. Sometimes, people do the wrong things for what they believe are the right reasons. The Guardians probably see themselves as Mary Hollow's protectors, not as villains. Holly shook her head, still struggling to reconcile her memories of these kindly elders with the dark actions of the Guardians. Have you encountered anything like this before? In your work with the council, I mean? Jack was quiet for a moment, his icy blue eyes distant. Secret magical societies aren't uncommon, he said finally. In many magical enclaves, there are groups dedicated to preserving ancient traditions or protecting powerful artifacts. Some, like the Guardians, take their mission to extremes. He went on to share insights from his experiences, describing secret societies he had encountered in other realms. There were groups that guarded the gateways between worlds, others that preserved forgotten spells, and some that sought to hoard magical power for themselves. The challenge, Jack explained, is that these societies often start with noble intentions. They genuinely believe they're doing what's best for their communities. But over time, the secrecy and power can corrupt them. Holly listened, fascinated despite her growing unease. But surely change is necessary sometimes? Mary Hollow can't stay isolated forever, can it? This sparked a heated debate between them about the morality of preserving traditions versus embracing change. Holly argued passionately for the importance of growth and adaptation, while Jack played devil's advocate, pointing out the potential dangers of unchecked magical advancement. Look at what happened in the realm of Eternal Spring, Jack said. They embraced every new magical innovation without considering the consequences. Now their realm is on the brink of collapse, the natural balance completely disrupted. But that doesn't mean all change is bad, Holly countered. Mary Hollow's magic is all about joy and giving. Surely we can find a way to share that with the world without losing who we are. As their debate wound down, both Holly and Jack felt they understood the complexities of the situation better. The Guardians of Yuletide weren't simple villains, but misguided protectors whose methods had become dangerous and extreme. So, Holly said, her voice filled with determination, what's our next move? We can't just confront the entire society at once. Jack nodded, his tactical mind already working on a plan. We need to investigate specific members. If we can understand their individual motivations and roles within the society, we might be able to find a weak link. They spent the next hour carefully selecting targets for their investigation. They chose a mix of suspected guardians, some high-ranking elders, a few younger members who might be more open to change, and those who had access to key areas of Mary Hollow's magical infrastructure. We'll need to be careful, Jack warned. If the Guardians realize we're onto them, they might accelerate their plans, whatever those may be. Holly agreed, her mind already racing with ideas for subtle interrogation techniques. We'll need to use every resource at our disposal. My position as a respected baker in town, your outsider perspective, we can approach this from multiple angles. As they finalized their plans, Holly couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. They were delving into secrets that had been buried for centuries, challenging a powerful organization that had shaped Mary Hollow's very existence. The stakes were higher than ever, and the line between right and wrong was becoming increasingly blurred. Jack, Holly said softly as they prepared to put their plan into action, what if we're wrong about this? What if the guardians really are protecting Mary Hollow from some greater threat? Jack met her gaze, his icy blue eyes filled with a warmth that belied his frosty nature. That's why we investigate, Holly. We gather evidence, we listen, we observe. And in the end, we make the best decision we can with the information we have. Holly nodded, drawing strength from Jack's words and presence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets they uncovered, they would face them together. The fate of Mary Hollow, and perhaps the entire magical world, hung in the balance. As they stepped out into the snowy streets of Mary Hollow, the eternal Christmas lights twinkling overhead, Holly and Jack exchanged a determined look. Their investigation into the Guardians of Yuletide was about to begin in earnest, and neither of them could shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of life-changing discoveries. Their first target was Pixie Sugarplum at the orphanage. As they walked, Holly rehearsed her approach in her mind. She would bring a basket of her famous gingerbread cookies, ostensibly as a donation for the children, and use the opportunity to engage Pixie in conversation about Mary Hollow's traditions and the recent strange events. Jack, meanwhile, would use his ice magic to create a subtle distraction if needed, allowing Holly to snoop around the orphanage for any signs of guardian activity. They had agreed that Jack's true identity as a council investigator should remain hidden for now, to avoid tipping off the guardians to the full extent of their investigation. As they neared the gingerbread and candy cane structure of the Mary Hollow orphanage, Holly felt a mix of determination and guilt. Pixie Sugarplum had always been kind to her. Chapter 13, Friends or Foes? The crisp winter air of Mary Hollow nipped at Holly's cheeks as she and Jack made their way down Candy Cane Lane. Their first stop was the cozy gingerbread cottage of Mrs. Peppermint, Holly's elderly neighbor and longtime friend. As they approached, Holly felt a twinge of guilt. Mrs. Peppermint had always been kind to her, offering sage advice and warm cookies whenever Holly needed a sympathetic ear. Now, she was about to interrogate the sweet old elf under false pretenses. "Remember," Jack whispered as they reached the door, "we're just here for a friendly chat. Don't push too hard." Holly nodded, taking a deep breath before knocking. The door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Peppermint's smiling face, framed by her trademark silver curls. "Holly, dear. What a lovely surprise," Mrs. Peppermint exclaimed, her eyes twinkling. Her gaze shifted to Jack, curiosity evident. "And who's this handsome young man?" "This is Jack Frost, Mrs. Peppermint. He's new in town," Holly explained, forcing a cheerful smile. "We were hoping we could come in for a chat. I've brought some of my peppermint swirl cookies." Mrs. Peppermint's face lit up. "Well, you know I can never resist your baking. Come in, come in." As they settled into Mrs. Peppermint's cozy living room, surrounded by knitted blankets and the soft glow of enchanted candles, Holly steered the conversation towards the recent events in Mary Hollow. "It's been such a difficult time since Mayor Kringle's passing," Holly said, watching Mrs. Peppermint's reaction carefully. "I don't suppose you've heard any rumors about what might have happened?" Mrs. Peppermint's jovial expression faltered for a moment. "Oh, dear. It's all so tragic. But you know, Holly, sometimes it's best not to pry into matters that don't concern us." Jack leaned forward, his icy blue eyes intent. "But surely, Mrs. Peppermint, as one of Mary Hollow's most respected elders, you must have some insight into the town's deeper workings?" The old elf's eyes narrowed slightly, a flash of something, suspicion? Fear? Crossing her face. "Well," she said slowly, "I suppose there have always been those in Mary Hollow who take their responsibilities very seriously. Guardians of our traditions, you might say." Holly and Jack exchanged a quick glance. This was the closest anyone had come to openly acknowledging the Guardians of Yuletide. "Guardians?" Holly pressed gently. "What kind of guardians, Mrs. Peppermint?" The elderly elf seemed to catch herself, shaking her head with a forced chuckle. "Oh, just a figure of speech, dear. Now, who would like more hot cocoa? As they left Mrs. Peppermint's cottage an hour later, Holly's mind was whirling. They hadn't gotten any concrete information, but the old elf's evasiveness and subtle hints had confirmed their suspicions. The guardians of Yuletide were real, and they held significant influence in Merry Hollow. We need to talk to someone who might be more willing to share, Jack mused as they walked. Someone who's been around long enough to know the town's secrets, but maybe isn't as invested in keeping them. Holly's eyes lit up. I know just the person. Frosty, Snowman. He's the oldest resident in Merry Hollow, and he's always had a bit of an outsider perspective. They found Frosty, Snowman in his usual spot in the town square, his coal eyes surveying the bustling Christmas market. As Holly and Jack approached, the ancient snowman turned to regard them with a knowing look. Young Holly Evergreen and the mysterious Jack Frost, he rumbled, his voice like ice cracking. I wondered when you two would come seeking answers. Holly blinked in surprise. You were expecting us? Frosty, Snowman chuckled, a sound like falling icicles. My dear, when you've been around as long as I have, very little comes as a surprise. You're here about the guardians of Yuletide, are you not? Jack stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. What do you know about them? The snowman's coal eyes glittered. More than most, less than some. But knowledge, young ones, comes with a price. Are you prepared to pay it? Holly and Jack exchanged a determined look. We are, Holly said firmly. For the next hour, Frosty, Snowman regaled them with tales of Merry Hollow's early days, of the founding of the Guardians, and of the secret rituals that had shaped the town's magical destiny. He spoke of midnight ceremonies in the Whispering Woods, of oaths sworn on enchanted candy canes, and of the terrible price of betrayal. The Guardians believe they protect Merry Hollow, Frosty, Snowman explained, his voice low. But their methods, well, let's just say that not all who enter their ranks do so willingly. As they listened, Holly felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. The Guardians of Yuletide were far more sinister than she had imagined. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Holly, Frosty, Snowman said, his coal eyes fixed on her, you should know that the Guardians often recruit from Merry Hollow's most prominent families. Those with deep roots in the town's magical traditions. Holly's heart sank as the implication hit her. No, she whispered. Not Noelle. She couldn't be involved in this. But even as she protested, memories surfaced, Noelle's evasiveness when discussing the mayor's death, her sudden interest in ancient Christmas lore, the strange symbols Holly had glimpsed in her friend's toy shop. Jack placed a comforting hand on Holly's shoulder. We can't jump to conclusions. We need proof. Thanking Frosty, Snowman for his insights, Holly and Jack made their way towards Noelle's toy shop. Holly's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Noelle had been her best friend since childhood. The thought of her being involved with a secret society responsible for murder and magical manipulation was almost too much to bear. As they neared the toy shop, Jack suddenly pulled Holly into a shadowy alley. Look, he whispered, pointing to a group of figures hurrying down the street. Holly's eyes widened as she recognized several prominent Merry Hollow residents, including Noelle, slipping into an abandoned gingerbread factory on the outskirts of town. It must be a meeting of the Guardians, Jack murmured. This is our chance to gather some real evidence. Carefully, they made their way to the factory, finding a partially open window through which they could observe the gathering. Inside, a group of about a dozen elves, humans, and magical creatures stood in a circle, their faces serious in the flickering candlelight. Jack pressed his hand against the window, a thin layer of ice spreading from his touch. This will help amplify the sound, he explained quietly. Through the magical ice, snippets of conversation reached their ears. The balance is shifting. Must act soon, before it's too late. The snow globe's power is waning. Kringle was going to expose everything. Holly's heart raced as she listened. They were finally getting some answers, but each revelation brought more questions. What balance were they talking about? What was the significance of the snow globe? Suddenly, Noelle's voice cut through the murmurs, clear and passionate. We took an oath to protect Mary Hollow, no matter the cost. We cannot falter now, not when we're so close to. Before she could finish, a floorboard creaked beneath Jack's foot. The gathered guardians fell silent, heads turning towards the window. Someone's there, a voice cried out. Holly and Jack didn't wait to see what would happen next. They ran, their feet crunching in the snow as they fled back towards the town center. Behind them, they could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. They didn't stop running until they reached Holly's cottage, slamming the door behind them and reinforcing it with every protection spell they knew. As they caught their breath, the weight of what they had witnessed settled over them. Holly, Jack said gently, I'm so sorry about Noelle. I know how much her friendship means to you. Holly sank into a chair, her head in her hands. I can't believe it. Noelle, a member of the Guardians? Involved in all this darkness? It doesn't make sense. Jack knelt beside her, his cool hand comforting on her arm. People are complex, Holly. Noelle might believe she's doing the right thing, protecting Mary Hollow in her own way. But at what cost? Holly looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Murder, Chapter 14, Ancient Magic, Modern Problems. The morning after their covert observation of the Guardians meeting, Holly and Jack sat surrounded by ancient tomes and scrolls in Holly's living room. They had spent the night poring over every reference to old Christmas magic they could find, searching for clues about the traditions mentioned in the secret gathering. Look at this, Holly said, her finger tracing a faded illustration in a particularly dusty grimoire. It talks about a ritual called the Binding of the Yule Star. Apparently, it was used by ancient Christmas wizards to channel the power of celestial bodies into their spells. Jack leaned in, his icy breath causing frost patterns to form on the page's edges. Interesting. And potentially very dangerous. Celestial magic is notoriously unstable. As they delved deeper into their research, a troubling picture began to emerge. The ancient traditions of Mary Hollow were far more potent and perilous than the cheery holiday magic currently practiced in the town. Jack, Holly said, her voice laced with concern, some of these spells, they're talking about manipulating time, altering reality, even bridging different realms. Is this really the kind of magic that was used to create Mary Hollow? Jack's expression was grave as he nodded. It's likely. The kind of power needed to maintain an eternal Christmas, to keep a town hidden from the outside world, it would require magic of this magnitude. But why are these spells forbidden now? Holly asked. If they're what created Mary Hollow in the first place, why does the Magical Realm Council ban them? Jack sighed, running a hand through his frost-white hair. It's complicated, Holly. These ancient magics are incredibly powerful, yes, but they're also dangerously unpredictable. The Council has seen firsthand the catastrophic consequences of their misuse. He went on to explain how, in other magical realms, the use of such potent spells had led to disasters, time loops that trapped entire communities, reality warps that erased people from existence, and rifts between worlds that allowed chaos to spill through. The Council's primary mission is to maintain the balance of magic across all realms, Jack continued. These ancient spells, while powerful, threaten that balance. They draw on energies that are fundamental to the fabric of reality itself. Misuse them, and you risk unraveling that fabric entirely. Holly shuddered at the thought. So if the Guardians of Yuletide are trying to revive these traditions, then they're playing with forces they can't possibly control, Jack finished grimly. As they continued their research, they began to theorize how these ancient magics might be connected to Mayor Kringle's murder and the other strange events in Mary Hollow. What if, Holly posited, the mayor discovered that the guardians were practicing these forbidden spells? Maybe he was going to expose them, and they silenced him to protect their secret. Jack nodded thoughtfully. It's possible. Or perhaps they needed him for some ritual. Some of these spells require sacrifices of powerful magical beings. The implication hung heavily in the air between them. The idea that their beloved mayor might have been not just murdered, but sacrificed in some dark ritual, was almost too horrifying to contemplate. Seeking a respite from the grim subject matter, Holly suggested they take a break to practice some modern holiday magic. She wanted to demonstrate the stark contrast between the cheerful, benign spells used in present-day Merry Hollow and the ominous ancient traditions they had been researching. "Watch this," Holly said, picking up her wand. With a flick and a swish, she conjured a small, glowing Christmas ornament. It floated in the air, spinning gently and emitting a warm, comforting light. "This is a simple cheering charm. We use it to boost spirits during the holiday season." Jack observed with interest, his icy blue eyes reflecting the ornament's gentle glow. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "And I can feel the positive energy it's radiating. This is the kind of magic that makes Merry Hollow special." Holly beamed, pleased by Jack's approval. She went on to demonstrate other modern Christmas spells, enchantments to keep hot cocoa at the perfect temperature, charms to make snowflakes dance in intricate patterns, and spells to bring holiday decorations to life. As they practiced these lighter magics, Holly and Jack found themselves discussing the delicate balance between preserving magical heritage and ensuring the safety of all. "I understand why the Guardians want to protect the old ways," Holly admitted. "These ancient spells are part of Merry Hollow's history. They're what made our town what it is." Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. Preservation of magical knowledge is important. But so is recognizing when certain practices have become too dangerous to continue. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden idea from Holly. "Jack, what if we tried to recreate one of the simpler ancient spells? Just to understand what we're dealing with better?" Jack hesitated, clearly uneasy with the suggestion. "Holly, that could be incredibly risky. We don't fully understand how these magics work." But Holly was already flipping through one of the old spell books. "Here, look at this one. It's a spell to invoke the spirit of winter's past. It doesn't seem too dangerous, and it might give us insight into how the Guardians are using these magics." Against his better judgment, Jack agreed to assist Holly in the experiment. They carefully drew the required magical symbols on the floor, using crushed candy canes and powdered snow. Holly stood in the center of the circle, her wand raised, while Jack stood ready to intervene if anything went wrong. As Holly began to chant the ancient words, the air in the room grew thick with magical energy. Snowflakes began to swirl around her, faster and faster, until she was enveloped in a miniature blizzard. The temperature plummeted, frost creeping across the windows and furniture. Suddenly, Holly's eyes flew open, glowing with an eerie blue light. When she spoke, her voice echoed as if coming from a great distance. "I see. I see the first Christmas of Merry Hollow. The founding magic, it's so strong, so pure. But there's something else, something dark beneath the surface." Before she could say more, the magical energy surged out of control. The blizzard expanded, filling the entire room. Icy winds howled, hurling books and furniture against the walls. Holly cried out in pain and fear, trapped in the center of the magical maelstrom. "Holly!" Jack shouted, fighting against the wind to reach her. He pushed through the swirling snow, his own ice powers barely a match for the ancient magic unleashed. Finally reaching Holly, Jack wrapped his arms around her, using his innate connection to winter magic to ground her. Slowly, painfully, he guided her through dispelling the out-of-control spell. As the last of the magical energy dissipated, they collapsed to the floor, breathless and shaken. "Are you all right?" Jack asked, helping Holly to sit up. She nodded weakly, her face pale. I think so. Jack, that was terrifying. I could feel the power of that spell. It was like it had a mind of its own, like it was trying to pull me into the past. Jack's expression was grim. Now you understand why these magics are forbidden. Even a relatively simple spell like that could have had catastrophic consequences if we hadn't stopped it in time. As they surveyed the damage to Holly's living room, shattered ornaments, overturned furniture, and a layer of magical frost covering everything, the gravity of the situation truly sank in. If this is what a minor spell can do, Holly said quietly, imagine the damage the Guardians could cause with more powerful rituals. Jack nodded solemnly. The threat to Mary Hollow is far greater than we initially thought. If the Guardians are delving into these ancient magics, they're not just risking their own lives, but the safety of the entire town, maybe even the whole realm. As they began to clean up the magical debris, Holly and Jack's minds raced with the implications of their discovery. The Guardians of Yuletide, in their misguided attempt to protect Mary Hollow's traditions, were meddling with forces that could tear the very fabric of their reality apart. We need to stop them, Holly said, determination stealing her voice despite her lingering exhaustion from the spell. Whatever they're planning, whatever ritual they think will save Mary Hollow, it's too dangerous. Jack agreed, but his expression was troubled. The question is, how? We're talking about some of the most powerful and influential members. Chapter 15, Pieces of the Puzzle. The aroma of gingerbread and cinnamon filled Holly's cottage as she stood in her kitchen, methodically kneading dough. After the intense research and magical mishaps of the previous day, she had suggested they take a short break. Baking had always helped clear her mind, and right now, she desperately needed clarity. As Holly's hands worked the dough, her mind wandered over the various clues and information they had gathered. The rhythm of kneading seemed to sync with her thoughts, each press and fold bringing disparate pieces of the puzzle closer together. Suddenly, Holly's eyes widened. "Jack," she called out, her voice filled with excitement. "Jack, I think I've got it." Jack hurried into the kitchen, a concerned look on his face. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Holly said, a grin spreading across her flour-dusted face. "Everything's right. I think I understand how it all fits together." Quickly washing her hands, Holly led Jack to the living room. With a wave of her wand, she conjured a large, shimmering board in midair. "We need to visualize this," she explained, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. Over the next hour, Holly and Jack worked together to create a magical evidence board. Glowing strands connected floating images and notes, forming a complex web of information. As they worked, the full picture of what was happening in Mary Hollow began to emerge. "Look here," Holly said, pointing to an image of Mayor Kringle. The mayor was planning to modernize some of Mary Hollow's magical practices, right? But what if that wasn't all? Jack nodded, following her train of thought. His plans must have posed a bigger threat to the Guardians than we realized. Holly agreed, adding another strand to the board. Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. Remember what Ginger Snapdragon told us? The mayor mentioned balancing the scales. What if he had discovered something about the fundamental magic of Mary Hollow? As they continued to connect the dots, a troubling realization dawned on them. The mayor's plans hadn't just been about updating a few old traditions, they had threatened the very core of what the Guardians were protecting. But that doesn't explain the tree's power failure, Jack mused, his icy brow furrowed in concentration. Holly bit her lip, thinking hard. What if that was an unintended consequence? Look at the timeline we've created. The tree lost its power after the mayor's death. What if the Guardian's actions somehow disrupted the magical balance of Mary Hollow? Jack's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. Of course. The eternal Christmas magic of Merry Hollow must be maintained by some sort of equilibrium. If the Guardians used powerful, ancient magic to remove the mayor, it could have thrown everything off balance. As they continued to analyze the evidence, a chilling conclusion began to form. The Guardians of Yuletide weren't just trying to preserve old traditions, they were after something much bigger. Jack, Holly said slowly, her voice filled with a mix of awe and fear, I think the Guardians are trying to amplify Merry Hollow's magic. Not just preserve it, but make it stronger, more far-reaching. Jack nodded grimly. It fits with what we've learned about the ancient spells they're using. But why? What's their ultimate goal? As Holly stared at the evidence board, an old memory stirred in the back of her mind. Wait a minute, she murmured, her eyes unfocusing slightly as she tried to recall. There's an old Merry Hollow legend, something my grandmother used to tell me. She closed her eyes, concentrating hard. When she opened them again, they were shining with realization. The legend of the eternal Yule. She exclaimed. It's a story about the founding of Merry Hollow. According to the legend, our town was created as a sanctuary, a place where the spirit of Christmas could be preserved forever. Jack leaned in, intrigued. Go on, he urged. But here's the thing, Holly continued excitedly, the legend says that one day, when the world needed it most, Merry Hollow's magic would expand, covering the entire world in eternal Christmas cheer. A heavy silence fell between them as the implication of Holly's words sank in. You don't think? Jack began, his voice hushed. Holly nodded solemnly. I think that's exactly what the Guardians are trying to do. They're not just protecting Merry Hollow, they're trying to fulfill the prophecy. They want to spread our eternal Christmas to the whole world. As they absorbed this staggering realization, Holly's mind raced with implications. Jack, think about it. If they succeed, it wouldn't just be about endless winter and Christmas decorations. They'd be forcing the magic of Merry Hollow onto the entire planet. The joy, the wonder, but also the isolation, the secrets, everything. Jack's face was grim. And the magical imbalance would be catastrophic. The world isn't designed to handle that kind of concentrated Christmas magic. It could lead to reality warps, time distortions, who knows what else. Holly started pacing, her hands gesticulating as she thought out loud. But why now? What's changed that's made the Guardians decide to act on this ancient legend? Jack considered for a moment. Maybe it's not just about Merry Hollow anymore. You said the legend mentions when the world needed it most. What if the Guardians believe that time has come? Holly's eyes widened. Of course. With all the conflicts and problems in the outside world, they might think they're doing everyone a favor. Bringing eternal Christmas cheer to a troubled planet. A forced utopia, Jack murmured. Born of good intentions, but potentially disastrous. As they continued to refine their theory, adding more connections to their magical evidence board, a soft chime echoed through the room. Jack reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, icy crystal. Its surface was covered in swirling, frost-like patterns that were rapidly changing. It's a message from the council, Jack explained, his eyes scanning the shifting patterns. As he decoded the message, his face grew increasingly grave. What is it? Holly asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. What does it say? Jack looked up, his icy blue eyes filled with urgency. The council has detected a massive surge of magical energy building around Merry Hollow. They say it's unlike anything they've ever seen before. Holly, whatever the Guardians are planning, it's happening soon. Holly felt her heart racing as the full weight of the situation crashed down upon her. They weren't just dealing with a murder investigation or a local magical disturbance anymore. The Guardians of Yuletide were on the verge of unleashing a spell that could alter the entire world. How long do we have? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's expression was grim. Based on the energy readings, less than 48 hours. Holly's mind reeled. Less than 2 days to stop a group of powerful, well-organized mages from casting a world-altering spell. Less than 2 days to save not just Mary Hollow, but potentially the entire global balance of magic. We need a plan, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. And we need help. Jack, is there any way the council can send reinforcements? Jack shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. The message says they're mobilizing, but it'll take time for them to breach Mary Hollow's magical barriers. We're on our own for now. Holly took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Then we'll have to make do with what we have. We know who some of the guardians are. We have an idea of what they're planning. And we have each other. Jack reached out, taking Holly's hand in his. The coolness of his touch was comforting, grounding. You're right, he said, a determined glint in his eye. We can do this. We have to. They turned back to their magical evidence board, minds racing to formulate a plan. Holly couldn't shake a sense of bittersweet irony. All her life, she had believed in the magic of Christmas, in its power to bring joy and wonder to the world. Now, she was fighting to prevent that very magic from being forced upon an unsuspecting globe. Jack, she said softly, even if we stop the Guardians, what happens to Mary Hollow? To our eternal Christmas? Jack squeezed her hand gently. I don't know, Holly. The next 2 days would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. But as Holly caught Jack's eye across the room, sharing a determined smile, she knew they were equal to the task. The final battle for Mary Hollow, and the world, was about to begin. Jack, Holly said as they gathered their materials, ready to set their plan in motion, whatever happens, I'm glad you're here. I couldn't do this without you. Jack's cool hand found hers, squeezing gently. There's nowhere else I'd rather be, Holly. We're in this together, until the end. With one last look at their magical evidence board, Holly and Jack stepped out into the crisp morning air of Mary Hollow. The eternal Christmas lights still twinkled overhead, but to Holly, they now seemed like a countdown clock, each sparkle bringing them closer to the moment of truth. As they made their way towards the town square, ready to begin gathering allies and making preparations, Holly silently vowed to do whatever it took to save her beloved town, and the world beyond, from the well-intentioned but misguided plans of the Guardians of Yuletide. The true spirit of Christmas, she knew, couldn't be forced or mandated. It had to be chosen, cultivated, and shared freely. And that was exactly what she and Jack intended to fight for. Chapter 16, Eve of Destruction. The morning sun had barely risen over Mary Hollow when Holly and Jack huddled over the icy crystal containing the council's message. They had spent a restless night strategizing, and now, with clearer heads, they were determined to decipher every nuance of the cryptic communication. Look at this part again, Holly said, pointing to a series of frost patterns. The council mentions a central artifact being crucial to the Guardian's plan. What could that be? Jack's eyes widened as realization dawned. The snow globe. Remember the legend you told me about? The one that said Mary Hollow was created as a sanctuary? Holly nodded, her mind racing. Of course. The enchanted snow globe that's supposed to be the source of Mary Hollow's eternal Christmas magic. But I've never actually seen it. Have you? Jack shook his head. It must be kept hidden, protected. But if the Guardians are planning to use it to amplify their spell, then they'll need to get their hands on it first, Holly finished, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with Jack's icy presence. They pored over the message again, cross-referencing it with their notes and the magical evidence board they had created. Slowly, a terrifying picture began to emerge. Holly, Jack said, his voice grave, I think I know when they're planning to make their move. Look at this reference to the night when magic peaks, it has to be talking about Christmas Eve. Holly felt her heart skip a beat. The Christmas Eve ceremony. Of course. It's when the entire town gathers in the square. The magical energy would be at its highest point. And it would provide the perfect cover for the Guardians to steal the snow globe, Jack added. With everyone distracted by the festivities. They could slip in, take the artifact, and no one would be the wiser, Holly finished, her mind whirling with the implications. We need to find out where the snow globe is kept and what kind of protections it has. With a new sense of urgency, Holly and Jack set out to investigate the magical defenses surrounding the mysterious snow globe. They started at the town hall, surreptitiously examining old building plans and historical documents for any clues about hidden chambers or magical vaults. As they searched, Holly couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Jack, she whispered, doesn't it seem strange that there's so little information about something so important? Even in the most classified documents, there's barely a mention of the snow globe. Jack nodded, his brow furrowed. You're right. It's almost as if someone has been systematically removing any reference to it. But who would have that kind of access and authority? The question hung between them, adding another layer of complexity to their already daunting task. After hours of fruitless searching, Holly had an idea. Jack, what if we approach this from a different angle? Instead of looking for the snow globe itself, what if we try to track the magical energy it must be emitting? Jack's eyes lit up. Brilliant. But how do we do that without alerting the Guardians to our investigation? Holly grinned, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. Leave that to me. I think it's time to do some magical baking. Back in her kitchen, Holly set to work creating what she called surveillance cookies. Using a combination of her baking skills and intricate charm work, she infused each gingerbread man with detection spells designed to pick up on powerful magical signatures. These little guys will wander around town, looking like normal enchanted treats, Holly explained as she put the finishing touches on the cookies. But they'll actually be mapping out magical hotspots. If the snow globe is anywhere in Merry Hollow, these cookies will find it. Jack watched in amazement as Holly worked, once again impressed by her creative approach to magic. Holly, you're a genius. But how do we make sure the cookies get to the right places without arousing suspicion? Holly's smile widened. Simple. We're going to donate them to the Christmas Eve celebration preparations. They'll be distributed all over town, and no one will think twice about seeing gingerbread men walking around during the holidays. As Holly put the finishing touches on her magical creations, Jack couldn't help but marvel at her ingenuity. You know, he said softly, I've seen all kinds of magic in my work with the council, but I've never encountered anything quite like your baking magic. It's special. Holly felt a warmth spread through her cheeks that had nothing to do with the heat of the oven. Thanks, Jack. I guess I've always believed that the best magic comes from the heart. And what's more heartfelt than baking for others? Their plan set in motion, Holly and Jack spent the next few hours strategically placing the surveillance cookies around Merry Hollow. They moved carefully, always aware that they might be watched by members of the Guardians of Yuletide. As evening fell, they retreated to Holly's cottage to monitor the magical feedback. Holly had set up a makeshift command center in her living room, with magical screens showing the location and status of each surveillance cookie. Now we wait, Holly said, settling into an armchair with a mug of her special hot chocolate. The cookies will need time to gather information and detect any unusual magical signatures. Jack nodded, his icy blue eyes scanning the screens intently. Let's hope they find something soon. We're running out of time. As they waited, Holly found her mind wandering to all that had happened since Jack arrived in Merry Hollow. She glanced at him, taking in his profile as he focused on the magical displays. Despite everything, she felt grateful for his presence, for the way he had opened her eyes to the larger magical world beyond Merry Hollow. Jack, she said softly, I've been meaning to ask, after all this is over, what will happen? Will you have to leave? Jack turned to her, his expression a mix of emotions Holly couldn't quite decipher. I don't know, Holly. My mission here was always meant to be temporary. But now. He trailed off, seemingly unsure how to continue. Before Holly could press further, one of the magical screens flashed urgently. They both leaped to attention, all personal matters forgotten in the face of their mission. Look! Holly exclaimed, pointing to a pulsing dot on the map of Merry Hollow. That's coming from the old gingerbread factory on the edge of town. The magical signature is off the charts. Jack leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he examined the readings. It's not the snow globe, he said after a moment. The energy pattern is different. But it's definitely powerful magic. We should check it out. Quickly gathering their supplies, Holly and Jack set out into the night. The streets of Merry Hollow were quiet, most residents already in bed in anticipation of the big Christmas Eve celebrations the next day. As they approached the abandoned factory, they could see a faint glow emanating from its windows. Carefully, they crept closer, using Jack's ice magic to amplify the sound coming from inside. They could hear muffled voices, and as they listened, their eyes widened in shock. Must move quickly, a voice Holly recognized as belonging to Cornelius Candy Cane, a senior member of the town council, was saying. The snow globe's power is essential for the ritual. Without it, we cannot hope to extend Merry Hollow's blessing to the rest of the world. But the protections are strong, another voice argued. How can we be sure we'll be able to breach them during the ceremony? Leave that to me, a third voice said, and Holly had to stifle a gasp as she recognized Noelle's voice. I've been working on a counterspell that should disable the wards long enough for us to retrieve the artifact. Holly and Jack listened intently as the Guardians discussed their plans, their hearts racing with each new revelation. The snow globe was apparently kept in a secret chamber beneath the great Christmas tree in the town square. The magical protections around it were tied to the town's festive spirit. As long as the Christmas Eve ceremony was in full swing, the wards would be at their strongest. But the Guardians had found a way to use this to their advantage. They planned to create a disturbance during the ceremony, momentarily disrupting the town's collective joy. In that brief window, they would strike, disabling the wards and stealing the snow globe. As the meeting concluded and the Guardians began to disperse, Holly and Jack quickly retreated, their minds reeling from what they had overheard. We have to tell someone, Holly said as soon as they were safely away. The town authorities need to know what's going on. But Jack hesitated. Holly, think about. We're missing something, Holly said, frustration evident in her voice. Some piece of the puzzle that would make all of this make sense. Jack stood up, stretching his stiff muscles. You're right. But we're not going to figure it out by exhausting ourselves. We should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, and we need to be at our best. Holly nodded reluctantly, knowing he was right but hating the idea of sleeping while the fate of Merry Hollow, and potentially the world, hung in the balance. As they prepared to turn in for the night, Holly caught Jack's hand. Jack, she said softly, whatever happens tomorrow. I'm glad you're here. I couldn't do this without you. Jack's icy blue eyes softened, a warm smile spreading across his face. There's nowhere else I'd rather be, Holly. We're in this together, all the way. With those words of reassurance, they settled in for a few hours of restless sleep. Outside, the eternal Christmas lights of Merry Hollow twinkled peacefully, unaware of the danger that lurked beneath their cheerful glow. In less than 24 hours, the fate of their magical town, and perhaps the entire world, would be decided. As Holly drifted off to sleep, her mind swirled with images of snow globes and secret societies, of betrayal and hope. Tomorrow would bring the greatest challenge of her life. But with Jack by her side and the true spirit of Christmas in her heart, she knew they stood a fighting chance. The clock on her bedside table ticked steadily, counting down the hours until the Christmas Eve ceremony. Until the moment when Holly and Jack would have to stand against the guardians of Yuletide and fight for the very soul of Christmas itself. As the first light of dawn began to creep through Holly's window, she awoke with a start, her heart pounding. The weight of their mission pressed down on her, but as she looked over and saw Jack's sleeping form on the couch, she felt a surge of determination. They had come too far to fail now. Quietly, so as not to wake Jack, Holly made her way to the kitchen. She had work to do. The magical fruitcake she had proposed would take time to prepare, and she wanted it to be perfect. As she gathered her ingredients, infusing each one with protective spells and charms, Holly allowed herself a moment of reflection. This time yesterday, her biggest concern had been perfecting her gingerbread recipe for the Christmas Eve celebration. Now, she was preparing to face off against a secret society intent on reshaping the world. Life had a funny way of throwing curveballs, even in a place as seemingly idyllic as Merry Hollow. As the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the air, Holly heard Jack stirring in the living room. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair tousled from sleep but his eyes alert. "Good morning," Holly said, managing a small smile. "I hope you're hungry. We've got a big day ahead of us, and we'll need all the strength we can get." Jack nodded, moving to help her with the baking. As they worked side by side, a comfortable silence fell between them. There was so much left unsaid about their feelings, about what would happen after this was all over, but for now, their focus had to be on the task at hand. The sun rose higher in the sky, and Merry Hollow began to come to life outside. Holly could hear the excited chatter of children, the bustling of last-minute preparations for the evening's ceremony. It all seemed so normal, so festive. How many of her neighbors, she wondered, had any idea of the danger that threatened their way of life? As they put the finishing touches on their magical defenses and ran through their plan one last time, Holly felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. In just a few short hours, they would be facing off against the guardians of Yuletide, fighting for the very soul of Christmas itself. "Are you ready for this?" Jack asked, his icy blue eyes searching hers. Holly took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "As ready as I'll ever be. Let's go save Christmas." The clock was ticking, the stage was set, and the fate of their world hung in the balance. Chapter 17, Preparations and Revelations. The sun rose on Christmas Eve, casting a warm glow over the snow-covered streets of Merry Hollow. For most of the town's residents, it was a day of joyous anticipation. But for Holly Evergreen and Jack Frost, it marked the beginning of their most crucial mission yet. They began early, gathering supplies for their counterplot against the guardians of Yuletide. Holly's kitchen became a whirlwind of activity as she baked batches of her specially enchanted fruitcake, each slice imbued with protective magic designed to reinforce the wards around the snow globe. Meanwhile, Jack worked on crafting intricate ice crystals that would serve as magical sensors, alerting them to any disturbances in the town's magical field during the Christmas Eve ceremony. As they worked, Holly couldn't help but voice a concern that had been nagging at her. "Jack, do you really think we can pull this off on our own? We're up against some of the most powerful magical practitioners in Merry Hollow." Jack paused in his crafting, his icy blue eyes meeting Holly's worried gaze. "You're right," he said after a moment. "We could use some help. But we need to be careful about who we trust." After some discussion, they agreed on a short list of potential allies, people they believed were not involved with the Guardians and who had the skills and integrity to assist in their mission. Their first stop was the workshop of Tinker Bell Jingles, Merry Hollow's resident magical inventor. The eccentric elf was known for her brilliant, if sometimes unpredictable, creations. A secret plot to steal an ancient artifact and unleash Christmas magic on the unsuspecting world? Tinker Bell's eyes sparkled with excitement as Holly and Jack explained the situation. "Count me in. I've got just the gadgets for a clandestine operation." Next, they visited Frosty Snowman, whose centuries of wisdom and powerful ice magic could prove invaluable. The ancient snowman listened gravely to their tale before nodding his coal-black head. I have long feared this day might come, he rumbled. The balance of magic in Merry Hollow has been shifting for years. You can count on my support. Their final recruit was Holly's apprentice at the bakery, a young elf named Peppermint, whose quick wit and talent for magical confectionery could be a secret weapon in their arsenal. As they swore their small band of allies to secrecy, Holly felt a glimmer of hope. They might be outnumbered, but they had assembled a formidable team. However, their next task proved to be the most emotionally challenging yet. Holly knew she had to confront Noelle, her oldest friend, about her suspected involvement with the Guardians. They found Noelle at her toy shop, putting the finishing touches on some enchanted dolls for the Christmas Eve celebration. The moment Holly saw her friend's familiar face, her heart clenched with a mixture of love and betrayal. Noelle, Holly began, trying to keep her voice steady, we need to talk. Noelle looked up, her usual cheerful smile faltering as she took in Holly's serious expression and Jack's presence. What's wrong, Holly? Taking a deep breath, Holly launched into an explanation of what they had discovered about the Guardians of Yuletide and their plans for the snow globe. As she spoke, she watched Noelle's face carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or recognition. To her surprise, Noelle's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and finally to anger. How dare you, she burst out, her cheeks flushing. How dare you accuse me of being part of some evil conspiracy? I've dedicated my life to bringing joy to the children of Merry Hollow. We heard you, Noelle, Holly said, her own temper rising. At the meeting in the old gingerbread factory. We know you're working on a counterspell to disable the wards around the snow globe. Noelle's eyes widened, and for a moment, Holly thought she saw a flicker of fear. But then her friend's face hardened. You don't understand anything, Noelle said coldly. What we're doing is for the greater good. The world needs Merry Hollow's magic now more than ever. But at what cost? Holly argued, her voice rising. You're messing with forces you can't control. You could destroy everything we love about Merry Hollow, everything that makes Christmas special. The argument grew heated, with both friends unleashing years of pent-up frustrations and fears. Jack stood by, ready to intervene if things got out of hand, but recognizing that this confrontation was necessary. Finally, Noelle threw up her hands in exasperation. I can't talk to you when you're like this, Holly. You've always been so stuck in your ways, so afraid of change. Maybe it's time for Merry Hollow to evolve, whether you like it or not. With that, she stormed out of the shop, leaving Holly and Jack in stunned silence. As they made their way back to Holly's cottage, Jack could see the toll the confrontation had taken on her. Are you okay? He asked gently. Holly shook her head, fighting back tears. I just can't believe it. Noelle and I have been friends since we were elflings. How could she be involved in something like this? Jack placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Sometimes people we care about make choices we don't understand. But we can't let that distract us from what we need to do. Nodding, Holly squared her shoulders. You're right. We need to focus on stopping the Guardians, no matter who's involved. Back at the cottage, Jack began teaching Holly some basic defensive ice magic. It's not as powerful as your holiday magic, he explained, but it might give you an edge if things get dicey tonight. Holly concentrated, following Jack's instructions as she attempted to create a shield of ice. Her first few attempts resulted in nothing more than a light frost on her fingertips, but gradually, she began to feel the cold energy flowing through her. As the afternoon wore on, they set out to place their magical traps around the town square, where they suspected the snow globe was hidden. Tinker Bell's ingenious devices were disguised as Christmas decorations, while slices of Holly's enchanted fruitcake were strategically hidden around the great Christmas tree. It was during this process that Holly noticed something odd. Jack, she called, pointing to a series of runes carved into the base of the tree. Have you ever seen markings like these before? Jack examined the runes, his brow furrowing in concentration. These are ancient symbols of containment and amplification, he said slowly. But they've been modified. See how this line intersects here? It's almost as if someone has been gradually altering the tree's magic over time, Holly finished, a chill running down her spine. But who would have the knowledge and opportunity to do something like that? They exchanged a worried look, both coming to the same realization. Whoever had carved these runes had to have intimate knowledge of Mary Hollow's deepest magical secrets, and unrestricted access to the town's most important magical artifact. We need to rethink our suspect list, Jack said grimly. Whoever is behind this, they're not just a member of the Guardians. They might be the leader of Mary Hollow itself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town square, Holly and Jack found a quiet moment amidst their frantic preparations. They stood together, watching as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky. Jack, Holly said softly, I'm scared. Not just about what might happen tonight, but about what comes after. If we succeed, Mary Hollow will never be the same. And if we fail? Jack turned to her, his icy blue eyes filled with a warmth that belied his frosty nature. I know, he said, taking her hand in his. But whatever happens, we're in this together. You've shown me what true Christmas spirit really means, Holly. And that's something worth fighting for. Holly felt her heart swell with emotion. Despite the danger ahead, despite the betrayals and revelations of the past few days, she knew that her connection with Jack was real and precious. As they stood there, the first notes of a Christmas carol drifted across the square. The Christmas Eve celebrations were beginning, and with them, the countdown to the Guardians' plan. It's time, Jack said, giving Holly's hand a reassuring squeeze. Holly nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Let's go save Christmas, she said, managing a smile. Hand in hand, they made their way towards the growing crowd in the town square. The air was filled with the scent of cinnamon and pine, and everywhere, the eternal Christmas lights of Mary Hollow twinkled brightly. It was a scene of perfect holiday cheer, and the backdrop for the most important battle of Holly and Jack's lives. As they took their positions, Holly couldn't help but marvel at the contrast between the festive atmosphere and the tension thrumming through her veins. Chapter 18, Midnight in Mary Hollow. The town square of Mary Hollow was a vision of Christmas perfection. Twinkling lights adorned every surface, their warm glow reflecting off the freshly fallen snow. The air was filled with the scent of cinnamon and pine, mingling with the excited chatter of the townsfolk gathered for the annual Christmas Eve ceremony. As the clock struck 11, the master of ceremonies, a jolly elf named Jingle Bellsworth, stepped up to the podium. His voice, magically amplified, rang out across the square. Friends, neighbors, dear citizens of Mary Hollow. Welcome to our most cherished tradition, the Christmas Eve ceremony. A cheer went up from the crowd, and Holly felt a pang in her heart. How many of these people, she wondered, had any idea of the danger that lurked beneath the festive surface? From her position near the great Christmas tree, Holly had a clear view of the entire square. She scanned the crowd, noting the positions of the other Guardians members they had identified. Noelle was there, standing with a group of other toymakers, her face a mask of cheerful excitement that didn't quite reach her eyes. Across the square, Jack had taken up his post, his icy presence camouflaged by a clever glamour spell that made him appear as just another festive reveler. Their eyes met briefly, and Holly felt a surge of determination. Whatever happened tonight, they were in this together. The ceremony began with the traditional carols, the entire town joining in a magical harmonization that sent shivers down Holly's spine. Under normal circumstances, she would have lost herself in the music, in the pure joy of Christmas magic. But tonight, every sense was on high alert, watching for any sign of the Guardians' plan unfolding. As Silent Night drew to a close, Holly noticed something odd. Several of the suspected Guardians members were moving through the crowd, their movements too purposeful to be casual mingling. They seemed to be taking up positions around the perimeter of the square, their hands hidden in the folds of their festive robes. Holly caught Jack's eye again, giving a subtle nod towards the suspicious activity. He returned the nod, his hand moving to his pocket where she knew he kept one of Tinker Bell's magical alarms. The carols gave way to speeches, with various town dignitaries taking the podium to share Christmas wishes and reflections on the past year. Holly only half listened, her attention focused on the movements of the Guardians and the steadily building magical energy she could feel emanating from the great Christmas tree. She noticed Frosty, Snowman positioned near the edge of the crowd, his coal eyes scanning the square with ancient wisdom. Peppermint, her young apprentice, was weaving through the crowd, distributing Holly's specially enchanted cookies. Each treat was designed to subtly reinforce the town's natural magical defenses, a precaution against whatever the Guardians had planned. As the speeches continued, Holly became aware of a growing tension in the air. It wasn't just magical energy building up, there was an almost palpable sense of anticipation, as if the very fabric of Merry Hollow was holding its breath, waiting for something momentous to occur. Finally, it was time for the main address, traditionally given by the mayor. But with Mayor Kringle's tragic demise still fresh in everyone's minds, it fell to his deputy, Cornelius Candy Cane, to deliver the speech. Cornelius stepped up to the podium, his usually jovial face solemn. "My dear friends," he began, his voice ringing out across the hushed square. "We gather tonight in a time of great change and challenge for our beloved Merry Hollow." Holly felt her pulse quicken. There was something in Cornelius's tone, an undercurrent of tension that seemed at odds with the festive occasion. For centuries, we have been the guardians of Christmas spirit, keeping alive the magic and wonder of the season in a world that too often forgets its importance. But times are changing, my friends. The world outside our borders grows darker, colder, more in need of the light we keep burning here in Merry Hollow. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not the usual light-hearted Christmas Eve address they were accustomed to. Tonight, Cornelius continued, his voice rising with passion, we stand at a crossroads. We can continue as we have, content in our isolated paradise, or we can embrace our true destiny, to spread the gift of eternal Christmas to a world desperately in need of its magic. Holly's eyes widened in shock. Was Cornelius openly declaring the Guardian's intentions? She glanced at Jack, seeing her own alarm mirrored in his face. As Cornelius's speech continued, growing more fervent with each passing moment, Holly became aware of a change in the magical atmosphere of the square. The energy emanating from the great Christmas tree was intensifying, pulsing in time with Cornelius's words. She skimmed the crowd, noting with growing unease that many of the townsfolk seemed entranced by the speech, their eyes glazed over with a magical sheen. The Guardians members she had been watching were now moving with more purpose, forming a loose circle around the tree. Holly's hand tightened on her wand, ready to act at a moment's notice. She could feel the magical protections they had put in place earlier straining against the growing surge of power. Whatever the Guardians were planning, it was big, far bigger than anything she had anticipated. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Holly's witch's intuition screamed a warning. Something was about to happen, something that could change Merry Hollow, and perhaps the world, forever. Suddenly, movement near the base of the tree caught her eye. A hooded figure was approaching, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost inhuman. In its hands, it carried a small, glowing object. The snow globe, Holly realized with a jolt of fear. They were already making their move. Without thinking, she began to push her way through the crowd, trying to reach the tree before it was too late. But the press of bodies, many of them swaying in a strange, trance-like state, made progress difficult. Across the square, she saw Jack reacting to the same threat. But before he could move, one of the Guardians stepped into his path, blocking his way. Holly was still too far away. She wouldn't make it in time. In desperation, she raised her wand, ready to cast a spell, any spell, to stop what was about to happen. But before she could utter an incantation, a blast of icy wind swept across the square. Startled cries arose from the crowd as a sudden flurry of snow obscured their vision. Jack had created a distraction, using his ice powers to buy them precious seconds. Holly seized the opportunity, charging forward through the disoriented crowd. She reached the base of the tree just as the hooded figure was placing the snow globe into an elaborately carved recess. "Stop!" Holly cried, her voice nearly lost in the growing chaos of the square. The figure turned, and Holly found herself staring into a pair of familiar eyes. Eyes she had known all her life, eyes that had always twinkled with Christmas cheer, but now burned with an otherworldly light. "Mrs. Claus?" Holly whispered, disbelief warring with horror in her voice. The kindly face of Mary Hollow's beloved matriarch twisted into a smile that held no warmth. "Oh, Holly dear," Mrs. Claus said, her voice honeyed with false sweetness. "You always were too curious for your own good." Before Holly could react, Mrs. Claus raised her hand, a bolt of searing magical energy leaping from her fingers towards Holly's chest. Time seemed to slow. Holly saw the bolt approaching, knew she should move, but her body felt frozen in shock. This couldn't be happening. Mrs. Claus, the heart and soul of Mary Hollow, the embodiment of Christmas spirit, how could she be behind all this? Just as the magical attack was about to strike, a wall of ice materialized in front of Holly, absorbing the blast. Jack was at her side in an instant, his face grim with determination. "Holly, are you all right?" he asked, his eyes never leaving Mrs. Claus. Holly nodded, unable to find her voice. Around them, the square had erupted into chaos. The spell that had held the townsfolk in thrall was broken, and panic was spreading as people began to realize something was terribly wrong. Cornelius's voice boomed out from the podium, magically amplified to be heard over the din. "Citizens of Mary Hollow, do not be afraid. What you are witnessing is the dawn of a new era for our town, for the world." But his words were drowned out by the growing roar of magic emanating from the great Christmas tree. The snow globe, now firmly lodged in its recess, was glowing with an intense, pulsing light. Waves of magical energy were radiating outward, causing the very air to shimmer and distort. "We have to stop this," Jack said, his voice tight with urgency. "If that spell reaches its full power, it could tear the fabric of reality apart." Holly nodded, pushing aside her shock and there, at the heart of it all, stood Mrs. Claus. Her hood had fallen back, revealing her familiar face transformed by an expression of triumphant ecstasy. She stood with her arms raised, channeling the power of the snow globe into the expanding spell. "Why?" Holly couldn't help but cry out as they drew closer. "Why are you doing this?" Mrs. Claus turned to her, and for a moment, Holly saw a flicker of the warm, loving woman she had known all her life. "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Claus said, her voice carrying even over the magical tumult, "can't you see? The world has forgotten the true meaning of Christmas. We're going to remind them. We're going to save them all. But not like this." Holly argued, her voice cracking with emotion. "Christmas isn't something you can force on people. It has to come from the heart." For a moment, doubt seemed to flicker in Mrs. Claus's eyes. But then her expression hardened once more. "You're young, Holly. You don't understand the weight of responsibility we bear. Sometimes, hard choices must be made for the greater good." With a gesture, Mrs. Claus sent another blast of magic towards them. This time, Holly was ready. She raised her wand, calling forth every ounce of her baking magic. A shield of gingerbread and frosting materialized before them, absorbing the impact of Mrs. Claus's spell. Jack seized the opportunity, sending a barrage of icy projectiles towards the snow globe. But they dissipated harmlessly against an invisible barrier surrounding the artifact. "It's no use," Mrs. Claus called out, almost pityingly. "The spell has already begun. Soon, the entire world will know the joy of eternal Christmas." But Holly refused to give up. As she racked her brain for a solution, her eyes fell on the faces of her fellow citizens. Some were still caught in the thrall of the Guardian's magic, their eyes glazed and unfocused. But others were beginning to shake off the spell, looks of confusion and fear replacing the artificial cheer. And in that moment, Holly knew what she had to do. "Jack," she said, gripping his arm tightly, "I need you to boost my magic." "Can you do that?" Jack nodded without hesitation, placing his hand over hers on her wand. Holly felt a surge of icy power flow into her, mingling with her own warm, festive magic. Taking a deep breath, Holly began to sing. It wasn't a spell, not in the traditional sense. It was a simple Christmas carol, one she had known since childhood. But she poured every ounce of her belief, her love for Mary Hollow, and her understanding of the true spirit of Christmas into the words. Slowly, hesitantly at first, other voices began to join in. Peppermint, her young face streaked with tears and frosting. Frosty, Snowman, his deep, rumbling tones a counterpoint to Holly's clear soprano. And then more and more, as the citizens of Mary Hollow began to remember who they were, what Christmas really meant to them. The song swelled, a wave of genuine Christmas spirit rising to challenge the artificial magic of the Guardian's spell. Holly felt the power building, not just around her, but through her, as if she were a conduit for something far greater than herself. With a final, triumphant note, Holly directed all of that power towards the snow globe. There was a moment of resistance, a feeling like pushing against an immovable object. And then, with a sound like 1,000 bells ringing at once, the barrier shattered. The snow globe exploded in a burst of light and magic, sending Mrs. Claus and the other guardians stumbling backward. The column of light flickered and died, the expanding spell faltering without its power source. For a moment, everything was still. And then, slowly, snowflakes began to fall. Not the eternal, unchanging snow of Mary Hollow's magical winter, but real snow, delicate and ephemeral and utterly beautiful. As the citizens of Mary Hollow looked around in wonder, Holly felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She leaned heavily against Jack, who wrapped an arm around her shoulders to support her. "We did it," she murmured, scarcely able to believe it herself. Jack nodded, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "You did it, Holly. You reminded everyone of what Christmas is really about." As the snow continued to fall, blanketing the town square in a fresh layer of white, Holly knew that Mary Hollow would never be the same. The road ahead would be challenging, as they learned to live without the magic that had defined them for so long. But looking around at the faces of her friends and neighbors, seeing the real joy and wonder in their eyes, Holly felt a surge of hope. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, truer to the real spirit of Christmas than ever before. The clock had struck midnight in Mary Hollow, and the world would never be the same again. Chapter 19, Battle by the Christmas Tree. The town square of Mary Hollow, usually a scene of festive cheer, had transformed into a battlefield. The great Christmas tree loomed at the center, its once twinkling lights now pulsing with an ominous energy that seemed to distort the very air around it. At its base, the enchanted snow globe glowed with an otherworldly light, the source of the magical chaos engulfing the town. As the clock struck its final midnight chime, several hooded figures broke from the crowd, converging on the tree with supernatural speed. The guardians of Yuletide had made their move. "Now, Jack!" Holly shouted, her voice nearly lost in the growing magical tumult. In perfect synchronization, Holly and Jack sprang into action. Jack swept his arm in a wide arc, and suddenly the ground around the tree was covered in a sheet of treacherously slick ice. Several of the charging guardians lost their footing, sliding and tumbling in an ungraceful heap. Meanwhile, Holly raised her wand, uttering a spell she had prepared for this very moment. "Gingerbread guardians, rise and protect." The elaborate gingerbread houses decorating the square began to shudder and crack. From their candied walls emerged towering gingerbread men, their icing eyes glowing with magical life. They formed a protective circle around the tree, their cookie hands clenched into formidable fists. The battle was on, and the air filled with a dizzying array of holiday-themed spells. Candy cane lances clashed against shields of solidified eggnog. Volleys of explosive ornaments arced through the air, countered by shimmering tinsel barriers. Holly found herself face to face with Noelle, her once best friend now an adversary. "Why, Noelle?" Holly cried as she deflected a barrage of razor-sharp playing cards. "How could you be part of this?" Noelle's face was a mask of determination. "You don't understand, Holly. The world needs our magic now more than ever. We can't stay hidden any longer." Their spells clashed in a shower of sparks and sugar plums. Holly's gingerbread golem lumbered to her aid, swatting away a swarm of enchanted toy soldiers that Noelle had animated. Across the square, Jack was engaged in an intense magical duel with Cornelius Candy Cane. The deputy mayor's candy cane staff crackled with ancient fire magic, a stark contrast to Jack's icy powers. Steam hissed and roiled around them as their spells collided. "You're too late!" Cornelius shouted, his jolly facade completely gone. "The ritual has begun. Mary Hollow's magic will spread to the entire world." Jack gritted his teeth, pushing back against the searing heat of Cornelius's magic. "Not if we have anything to say about it," he growled, redoubling his efforts. As the battle raged on, Holly became aware of a shift in the magical energies swirling around them. The snow globe's glow was intensifying, and she could feel reality itself starting to warp and bend. "Jack," she called out. "We need to get to the snow globe. It's the key to all of this." Fighting their way towards the tree, Holly and Jack found their path blocked by Mrs. Claus. The kindly matriarch of Mary Hollow stood before them, her eyes blazing with fanatical determination. "I'm sorry, dears," she said, her voice laced with genuine regret. "But I can't let you interfere. This is for the greater good." With a gesture, Mrs. Claus summoned a whirlwind of magical gift boxes. They flew at Holly and Jack like missiles, exploding into clouds of disorienting Christmas magic. As Holly battled against Mrs. Claus's surprising magical prowess, her mind raced. How long had the Guardians been planning this? How deep did the conspiracy go? Suddenly, a new voice cut through the chaos, amplified by magic to reach every corner of the square. "Enough!" The fighting paused as all eyes turned to the top of the Christmas tree. There, balanced precariously on the highest bough, stood a figure Holly knew all too well. "Mayor Kringle," she gasped, disbelief warring with hope in her voice. But as the figure descended, Holly's hope turned to ash. It wasn't Mayor Kringle at all, but someone wearing his face like a mask. As he touched the ground, the illusion melted away, revealing Frosty, Snowman? Jack exclaimed, his voice filled with shock and betrayal. The ancient snowman's coal eyes glittered with triumph. "Surprised, Jack? You should be. I've been planning this for centuries." Holly felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. Frosty, Snowman, the oldest and most respected resident of Mary Hollow, the very embodiment of winter magic, he was the mastermind behind it all? But why? Holly managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Frosty, Snowman's laugh was like the cracking of glaciers. "Why?" "Because the world has forgotten the true meaning of winter. Of magic. They've reduced Christmas to a commercial farce. With the power of the snow globe, we'll remind them. We'll cover the world in eternal winter, and they'll have no choice but to remember the magic they've lost." As the true scope of Frosty, Snowman's plan became clear, Holly felt a surge of determination cut through her shock and betrayal. This wasn't just about Mary Hollow anymore. The fate of the entire world hung in the balance. "We won't let you do this," Holly declared, raising her wand once more. Beside her, she felt Jack tense, ready for battle. Frosty, Snowman's eyes narrowed. You don't have a choice. With a gesture, he called forth a blizzard unlike anything Holly had ever seen. Snow and ice swirled around him, forming into monstrous shapes, polar bears made of living ice, wolves with icicle fangs, eagles with wings of frost. As these winter horrors charged towards them, Holly knew that this was it, the final battle for the soul of Merry Hollow and the future of Christmas itself. She glanced at Jack, saw the same mixture of fear and determination in his eyes that she felt in her heart. Together, she asked, holding out her hand. Jack took it, his icy touch a comfort in the chaos. Together, he agreed. And with that, they plunged into the fray, magic blazing from their wands, ready to fight for the true spirit of Christmas with everything they had. As the battle reached its crescendo, Holly found herself at the foot of the great Christmas tree, face to face with Frosty, Snowman. The ancient being's coal eyes burned with centuries of pent-up resentment and misguided purpose. Behind him, the snow globe pulsed with otherworldly power, reality itself seeming to warp around its crystalline surface. Holly's wand trembled in her grasp, her magic all but spent. She could feel Jack at her side, his icy presence a comfort even as his own powers waned. They were the last line of defense, the final barrier between Frosty, Snowman's twisted vision and the unsuspecting world beyond Merry Hollow. As Frosty, Snowman raised his arms, gathering the full force of his winter magic for one last, devastating attack, Holly's mind raced. Everything they had fought for, every truth they had uncovered, every friendship tested and strengthened, it all came down to this moment. The fate of Christmas itself hung in the balance, and as the magic surged around them, Holly knew that their next move would determine everything. With a shared glance of understanding, Holly and Jack braced themselves for the final confrontation, ready to give everything they had to preserve the true spirit of Christmas, not as an imposed magical state, but as a choice born of love, generosity, and hope. Chapter 20, The Spirit of Christmas. As Frosty, Snowman's winter magic bore down upon them, Holly felt a surge of something powerful within her heart. It wasn't just magic, it was faith, hope, and the true spirit of Christmas. With a clarity she had never known before, Holly stepped forward, her voice ringing out across the chaotic town square. "Stop," she cried, her words carrying a weight that seemed to still the very air. "This isn't what Christmas is about." All eyes turned to her, the battle momentarily frozen in tableau. "Christmas isn't about eternal winter or magical toys," Holly continued, her voice growing stronger. "It's not about forcing joy or controlling others. Christmas is about love, generosity, and the choice to be kind. It's about coming together, not tearing the world apart." Her words seemed to resonate with the townsfolk. One by one, they began to shake off the influence of the Guardian's magic, confusion and then understanding dawning on their faces. "Holly's right," Jack added, stepping up beside her. "The magic of Christmas isn't something that can be contained in a snow globe or forced upon the world. It lives in each of us, in the choices we make and the love we share." As they spoke, a warm glow began to emanate from the citizens of Merry Hollow. It started small, a twinkle here, a spark there, but soon grew into a brilliant light of genuine Christmas spirit. "Remember who we are," Holly called out. "Remember why we celebrate. Let's show the world the true magic of Christmas, not through force, but through love." The townsfolk began to join in, their voices rising in a chorus of Christmas carols. Each note seemed to carry with it a spark of magic, pure and untainted by the Guardian's manipulations. Frosty, Snowman's icy constructs began to melt as the wave of warm, genuine Christmas spirit washed over the square. The Guardians found their powers waning in the face of this unexpected resistance. "No!" Frosty, Snowman cried, his voice cracking like breaking ice. "You don't understand. The world needs our guidance, our control." But his protests were drowned out by the swell of music and magic. The combined Christmas spirit of Merry Hollow, led by Holly and Jack, overwhelmed the ancient winter magic. In a blinding flash of light, the snow globe's power surged and then subsided. As the glow faded, Frosty, Snowman stood alone, his icy powers depleted. "It's over," Holly said gently, approaching the defeated mastermind. "Why, Frost? Why did you do all this?" The ancient snowman's coal eyes dimmed with sorrow. "I've watched for centuries as the world forgot the true magic of winter, of Christmas. I thought I could make them remember, make them feel the wonder again." "But you can't force wonder," Jack said, placing a restraining hand on Frosty, Snowman's shoulder. "You can't control joy. That's not how Christmas magic works." As the town's security forces, led by a rather bewildered Peppermint Sticks, took Frosty, Snowman into custody, Holly turned her attention to the snow globe. Its glow had subsided, but she could feel the immense power still contained within. Carefully, she lifted the artifact. As soon as her fingers touched its surface, she felt a resonance, not just with her own magic, but with the spirit of everyone in Merry Hollow. The snow globe wasn't a tool of control, it was a focus for the town's collective Christmas spirit. As if in response to this realization, the great Christmas tree's lights suddenly sprang back to life. A gasp of wonder and joy rippled through the crowd as the familiar, warm glow bathed the square. Holly turned to Jack, her heart full to bursting with emotion. Their eyes met, and without a word, they moved towards each other. As their lips met in a kiss, soft snowflakes began to fall around them, not the eternal, unchanging snow of before, but real, ephemeral flakes, each one unique and beautiful. The citizens of Merry Hollow cheered, their joy no longer a magical compulsion but a genuine expression of relief and happiness. In the days that followed, Merry Hollow began the process of healing and rebuilding. The eternal winter gave way to natural seasons, and the town opened its borders to the outside world. Yet the magic of Christmas remained, not as an imposed state, but as a spirit cultivated in the hearts of its people. A week after the battle, Holly and Jack stood on the balcony of the Gingerbread Cottage Bakery, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, colors Merry Hollow hadn't seen in centuries. "So," Holly said, a hint of nervousness in her voice, "what happens now? Will you have to leave?" Jack turned to her, his icy blue eyes warm with affection. "The council has asked me to stay on as a liaison. It seems Merry Hollow still has a lot to teach the magical world about the true spirit of Christmas." Holly's heart leapt with joy. She leaned in, resting her head on Jack's shoulder. "I'm glad," she said softly. "I think we make a pretty good team." As they stood there, enjoying the beautiful sunset and each other's company, neither noticed the small, impish face peering at them from behind a nearby chimney. The creature's eyes glowed with mischievous magic, and in its hands, it clutched a small, strangely familiar toy. But that, as they say, is a story for another Christmas.